Welcome to the second day of iCatConnect, the event for everyone working with or for unowned cats across the world. Yesterday we focused on scene setting and an overview of the bigger picture of cat population management, including TNR. I hope you've had some time to reflect on what you heard yesterday and were able to join us for the live Q&A. We have another one at the end of today, so don't forget to register your questions in the chat. Today we're going to start with a presentation from Anne Enright from Australia about how important it is to work well with your veterinary partners.
Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Anne Enright, and today I'm going to talk about some points to consider when establishing TNR programs for cats with your local clinics. As you can see here, I'm a shelter veterinarian and over the years have also set up 3 community clinics. As a result, I can appreciate the concerns from both sides when it comes to TNR programs, and I hope to provide you with some tips and ideas on how to make these programs successful. With the veterinary shortages everywhere, clinics are under a lot of pressure. They're juggling clients, pets, staff, and community expectations. Now more than ever, it is so important that everyone works together and respects each other to make these programs successful so we can really start to address the worldwide cat overpopulation issue. So let's get started. Because people will be listening to this from all over the world, some of the points I mentioned may not be relevant in some regions, so you will need to be familiar with your local laws and legislation requirements regarding what you can and can't do. Also, as you can see, I'm trying to include quite a bit of information here, so I've listed some resources at the end of the presentation. If you feel you've missed something or you would like to find out more later on, you can always refer to those for more information. Let's kick off with establishing collaborating relationships with veterinary clinics. From having worked in clinics, I can say that when approached about helping with TNR programs, most likely the 2 things the clinic will be concerned about will be, will they be paid, and how will the extra work impact on the clinic workflow? Consequently, the TNR group will need to be financially stable enough to be able to pay the vet bills if the TNR program is to succeed long term. I have listed some of the main sources of income most organisations will be familiar with and hopefully provided 1 or 2 new ideas. In the early days, it may be that your organisation can only provide 1 or 2 TNR campaigns a year. The last point, pay forward plans, may be new to some. It is where you set up a fund with a specific purpose, for example, a microchipping campaign or a sterilisation campaign, and you use these funds to subsidise the veterinary costs. The heading Pay It Forward is a fund our clinic has in place where people can make a donation to contribute toward fees for people struggling to pay the cost. If this is something of interest to you, you're welcome to have a look at ours. The link is listed in the resources section. Moving on to the forms of relationships, as you can see here, there are quite a few options and you may have different arrangements altogether. If you are lucky enough to be near a university or teaching facility for vet nurses or veterinary students, you could approach them for assistance. I have a picture a little bit later that shows you how the University of Florida conducts spay-neuter campaigns, teaching the next generation of vets the importance of spay-neuter and surgery techniques. For those organisations that use local clinics, multiple clinics will enable you to spread the workload across a number of sites and may give you access to different specialist skills depending on individual veterinary interests. I really can't stress enough the importance of establishing treatment boundaries and what level or extent of treatment your organisation is able to support in the initial conversation. This will prevent unexpected large bills that may use large amounts of your hard-earned funds. Contacting specific organisations or hospitals for donations of items, for example, flea and worm treatments or bandages, which your organisation can use, and leave them at the clinic instead of needing to use the clinic supplies, as this will save you money. Having a well thought out plan and relationship with the clinic will open up education opportunities also. Clinic staff will obviously be able to help your team members with treatment and care practices, but your organisation will also be well placed to help educate the vet teams about the complications and problems associated with TNR. No one is better placed than those working on the ground to know how hard it can be and the importance of TNR programs. Also, vet teams may not have had the same exposure or understanding as your group, so it's a perfect opportunity for an information exchange and a win-win all round. Obviously, when organising TNR programs, you may come up against the odd challenge or hurdle you will need to negotiate. As mentioned earlier, being able to pay the veterinary costs may be a constant concern, and this is where having clear treatment guidelines will help manage program costs and outcomes. Emergencies happen and usually at unpredictable times, for example, out of hours, and these can be very expensive. So again, having clear guidelines on what veterinary teams are able to do will help stop those unexpected huge bills. Volunteers are the backbone of many organisations in any industry, and this is particularly true for those working in animal welfare. Acknowledging volunteers for their time and effort will help keep them motivated and engaged, which will in turn contribute to the program's success. Regular small gestures of appreciation go a long way in maintaining volunteer support. Unfortunately, if clinics have had bad experiences in the past with similar programs, you may find it more of a challenge to get your TNR program up and running. Keeping communication channels open will enable you to identify potential problems before they get out of control. And of course, there may be clinics or individuals who at this point in time do not align with or support your organisation's TNR goals. So we have our TNR program set up and we're ready to go. There is often some discussion around when to desex kittens. You might come across these terms prepubertal neutering or early age desexing, which refers to desexing kittens before they reach puberty. Today you may still come across vets that advocate desexing kittens at 6 months of age. I was listening to a webinar recently where the presenter commented that 6 months of neutering first started to appear in conversations decades ago. At the time, it was thought that kittens couldn't get pregnant any earlier than that, and it's just remained ever since. Now, with more knowledge and research, we know that kittens are able to get pregnant from as early as 4 months of age. And meet Tiger, a 17-week-old kitten that came into the clinic about 2 weeks ago for desexing, and she was already pregnant. Now, vets working in shelters and high-volume spay-neuter clinics desex kittens at a much younger age, usually around 8 to 10 weeks of age, to close that potential pregnancy loophole. Here's this photograph down at the bottom that I mentioned earlier from the University of Florida, where they're teaching the up-and-coming new vets of the benefits of early age desexing and improving their surgery skills. I thought I would touch on some of the benefits and myths of early age desexing. The benefits we all know, so I won't dwell on these. However, you may come across some of these pushbacks. One concern lately relates to the developmental concerns that can arise if animals are desexed too young. These concerns are mainly to do with dogs and in particular large breed dogs and do not relate to cats and kittens. Some vets may feel the surgery is more complicated because of the kitten's size. However, the surgery is actually easier and faster and they recover so well. The surgery will definitely not change their personality and it will not make them fat. That's an owner or feeder problem. And of course, you may come across vet or carer reluctance. If you do encounter this reluctance, it could provide an opportunity to have a conversation about their concerns, but I do appreciate this could be one of those hurdles mentioned earlier. A quick note on identifying sterilised cats. This is particularly important for TNR cats, so you don't trap or anaesthetise them twice. Again, check with your local laws as to what you are able to do, as there is international variation. Tattooing and ear tipping are very common. When ear tipping, just take the tip off straight across the top, just as you can see here in these two pictures on the right. Don't use a notch on the side of the ear, as this can look like an old fighting injury. Down the bottom here, I have some examples of some tattoos. The two on the left are common practice in the United States for both females and males. A small nick is made in the skin and is filled with tattoo ink. The other one here in the middle is used in Australia. The same tattoo is used in the left ear for males and females, as we are not allowed to ear tip in Australia. At times it can be difficult to tell if a cat or kitten has been desexed. Obviously, the first thing to do is to look for tattoos or ear tips, and if you can't see any, there are other ways. Males are easy, just lift the tail. You'll be looking for testicles like in this picture on the left. If desexed, they should look like my boy here in the middle. However, at times both testicles aren't always visible, as the cat may be what is called cryptorchid. This is where one or both testicles haven't descended. One way to check is to look at the penis. You'll most likely have to anaesthetize the cat to do this, and if he is not desexed, he will have barbs or spurs on the penis. They're those little white dots there that you can see at the base of the penis. These will disappear after he's been desexed. It usually takes 6 to 8 weeks following the surgery, and then they just disappear. Females, on the other hand, can be more difficult to determine if desexed or not. I've listed a number of options you can use. Obviously, these will depend upon what resources you have access to. At times, some vets will just decide to do what we call an ex-laparotomy, and that is where they perform like a surgical procedure. They open up the cat and they just go and have a look, and then they can determine whether they're being desexed or not. And finally, I thought I would talk about vaccines. These are so important as they can literally prevent devastating illnesses and disease outbreaks, especially amongst kittens whose immune system is still developing. They're also important in TNR programs as well, because they protect the community cats, which in turn protect the owned cats in the community as well. Vaccination courses can be divided into core and non-core vaccines. Core vaccines are also known as C3 and include panleukopenia, calicivirus, and herpes virus. Some countries also include rabies as part of their core protocol. This is particularly important for TNR programs, as you often only get one chance to vaccinate a community cat. Again, depending upon where you are located and whether there is a specific health concern, you may include more vaccines in your protocol. The diagram on the left highlights locations for specific vaccines. This has two purposes. One, to create more vaccination consistency between vets, and two, in the situation where an injection sarcoma may develop, as shown in the bottom picture, it is easy to amputate the affected limb and the cat will survive. This slide is more for information and outlines the recommended vaccination requirements for those cats and kittens that can be handled. If you are able to socialise TNR kittens, it is usually recommended they receive 2 or 3 vaccines, depending on their age as listed here. The immune protection they get from their mother can interfere with early vaccines, and there can be a period when the kitten may be exposed to infection. That's that pink section there in the graph on the right-hand side. As the mother's protection starts to fade, it is important they receive their last vaccine up to 16 weeks of age to ensure they are adequately protected. And finally, as mentioned here are some links to resources on the topics I've covered. I know somewhat quickly today. Thank you for your time and for listening today. I do hope you found it helpful and that it will help you set up a long-lasting, successful TNR program. Thank you once again, and all the very best luck with your endeavours and your TNR programs.
There is no question that most welfare issues arise because of cat overpopulation, and we need vets to neuter as many cats as possible, whether they're owned or unowned. At these times of reduced veterinary capacity, we need them to support this sector more than ever. Time again to reflect for a minute. If you made notes yesterday, maybe you'd like to do the same today. What kind of working relationship do you have with your vet? Are your needs being met? Do you feel you've communicated your needs well? Welcome back. It's all turning out to be about people, isn't it? People need to change their behaviour in order for goals on cat population management to be achieved, whether that goal relates to TNR or working effectively to find cats in shelters good homes as quickly as possible. And this is where it gets tricky, as changing human behaviour is about as challenging and complicated as it gets. Here's Harry Eckman to help us navigate through the theory of human behaviour change.
How do we change human behaviour? And in this talk, more specifically, the question is, how do we change people's behaviour in relation to how they care for, treat, and consider cats and their welfare? I'm Harry Eckman, Global Advisor for Cat Population Management at International Cat Care. And what we do know is that human behaviour is the root cause of most animal welfare issues, and therefore the root cause of most cat welfare issues. But before we answer the question of how do we change human behaviour, we need to first understand what human behaviour is. And it's not just one thing, it's a whole mix of things. Social and cultural influences, learned experiences, and acquired knowledge, all interconnected and interdependent, each one affecting and being affected by all the others. We're a melting pot of competing and conflicting intentions, expectations, desires, and beliefs. And every choice that we make and every decision that we take is as a result of all of these things in an infinite number of different combinations. Think about your behavior in relation to something as simple as choosing what to eat. How do we make our decisions? Well, it's going to be dependent on a lot of things. How hungry am I? What am I in the mood for? What did I have to eat yesterday? Am I alone or am I eating in company? And if I'm in company, what's everybody else having? And how expensive is the food? How tasty is it? How healthy is it? How long is it going to take to prepare? Is it vegetarian or vegan? And the relevance and importance of all of these things will be different every time we make a choice. It's a complicated equation. It's actually amazing that we make any choices at all and don't just starve to death holding a menu. But it's not like we actually have this thought process consciously happening every time we make a choice. This kind of decision making is generally unconscious and instinctive. In fact, between 90 and 95% of all cognition, all the thinking that drives our decisions and behaviors, occurs unconsciously. So if 90% of our decision making and behaviors occur unconsciously, how do we change behaviors? Well, to change behavior, we need to understand the 5 stages of behavior change. It doesn't matter what the behavior is. This is the model, the process that it will fit into, whether the decision-making process is conscious or unconscious. So first we have the pre-contemplation stage, and this is just simply knowing about something. Next, we have the contemplation stage. So that's believing in the advantages or the benefits of that thing, whatever that thing is. Next, we have the preparation stage. So that's having the capacity to be able to do something. And then next, we have the action stage. So that's acting on the opportunity to actually try. And then lastly, we have the maintenance stage. And that's just keeping it up and being consistent. Now, importantly, we need to remember that relapse and fallback is possible at any part of this process, at any one of these stages. Now, we're going to come back to this in a moment. But first, let's look at another essential tool for understanding how to change behavior. This is something called the COM-B framework or tool. COM stands for capability, opportunity, and motivation. To change behavior, the B in COM-B, you need these three things to be present. Now, this is fundamental to behavior change. Any person or group of people or organization or system that involves people needs to have the capability to change, the opportunity to change, and the motivation to change. If one of these things is missing, then change won't happen. Or if it does, it won't be sustainable. So what do we mean exactly by capability, opportunity, and motivation? Well, when we talk about capability, another way to think about it is having an awareness of the behavior or the cause of the behavior that we want to change. Do I have the physical and psychological ability that I need to make change? Do I have the knowledge and skills required to do it? And if I don't, then I need to find a way to obtain or gain them. When we talk about motivation, another way to think about it is the decision-making process in relation to the behavior or cause of the behavior. Is the decision made consciously or unconsciously? Do I believe it's a good idea? Am I in the habit of doing this? A lot of, and in many cases the majority of decision-making, and therefore behavior change, is emotionally driven. How do I feel about this? Believing something is a good idea is drawn as much from emotions as it is from knowledge, and making something habitual is one of the best ways of ensuring that changes in behavior become sustainable. And then lastly, when we talk about opportunity, another way to think about this is in relation to the environment in which the behavior or the cause of the behavior is present. What is the physical or social environment surrounding this behavior? Do I have the time and resources? Is this what others do around here? How we behave will depend in part on the time and resources that we have available. Changing behavior will likely require a different use or amount of time and resources. And how others behave is hugely important. We're a social species, and the influence of others plays a key role in how we behave and the choices that we make. As I said, these three things are fundamental to behavior change. They are the foundation and framework on which behavior change is built. If we don't have all three, we won't be able to change behaviors. But knowing that means that we can identify the barriers to change and look at the tools and the ways to overcome them. Now let's go back to our 5 stages of behavior change and look again at how this works in relation to the welfare of cats, but also how and where COM-B fits into this. Imagine a community where there are colonies of unneutered or unowned cats. For many of you, this could very well be on your own doorstep. So, stage 1, pre-contemplation, this would be where the community knows about neutering in principle. They know how it works. They know that if a cat goes to the vet, it can get neutered, and this will probably prevent kittens from being born. In COM-B terms, they have the capability, the awareness or knowledge of the causes of the problem. Now, in this scenario, in stage 2, contemplation, the community believes in the benefits of neutering. They understand that by neutering cats, it can help reduce the cat population, reduce the number of complaints about cats, and improve the welfare of cats. In COM-B terms, they have motivation because they believe this is a good idea. In stage 3, preparation, the community has the capacity for neutering. They have an organization with people able to go out and conduct T&R. They have vets capable and willing to perform the surgery. They have an understanding of the time and effort that this would take. In COM-B terms, they have the opportunity because they have the time and the resources necessary. Now in stage 4 is action. The community has and acts on the opportunity to neuter. So they put a plan into place based on all the pieces of the previous 3 stages being in place. They go into action. In COM-B terms, they have all 3 foundational pieces in place, capability, opportunity, and motivation, that allows them to act. And then in stage 5, we have maintenance. The community embraces this project and continues to use neutering as a tool in the long-term cat population management. Through behavior change, the community has created a new normal, a new and habitual way of managing their cat population. Now, it's important to understand your community and how this process works. If you focus on the wrong area, you won't get the result that you want, and you can end up having a negative impact on the welfare of cats, despite best intentions. Understanding the needs of cats, as well as the needs of a community, is essential when we want to change behaviors for the benefit of both. Don't fall into the trap of unintended outcomes. Here are some of the traps to be aware of. Firstly, knowing something doesn't mean you're going to do it. Awareness doesn't always result in behavior change. This is capability in a COM-B model and pre-contemplation in the stages of behavior change. It takes more than knowledge to change behavior. Change in attitude doesn't always mean change in behavior. Now, this is motivation in the COM-B model and contemplation in the stages of behavior change. It takes more than believing in the benefits of something to change behavior. Next, intention and planned behavior don't always lead to behavior change. This is opportunity in the COM-B model and preparation in the stages of behavior change. It takes more than simply having the resources necessary to change behavior. And then lastly, desired behaviors need to be modeled, rehearsed, reinforced, not just explained. This is what helps ensure that you move from the action stage to the maintenance stage of behavior change, turning behavior into something that becomes normal and habitual. Now we understand a little bit about behavior change. Here are a few of the tools that will help us to create those foundations of capability, opportunity, and motivation to change behaviors. Education is the first one. Increasing knowledge and understanding of the issues and potential solutions is an essential first step. Then we have training. Reducing the barriers and increasing capability is going to ensure that we have more of the pieces in place. Another tool is persuasion, using communications to induce positive feelings and cue positive actions is key to motivation. Another tool is modeling, so demonstrating examples for people to aspire to helps with social influence that's required to support behavior change. Next, we have habits. So to deliver long-lasting change, we need to ensure that the behavior can be easily repeated and become a new normal. Another really important tool is incentivization. Creating the expectation of benefit and reward is again really important for motivation. The counter to that is punishment, equally important, creating expectation of a negative cost of failure, and so reducing the chance potentially of that happening. And then lastly, environmental restructuring. So changing the physical and social context of the problem helps to reframe it so that again it becomes a new normal. There's hopefully going to be a point in the future where people actually forget how things used to be because we've established a new normal. Human behavior is complex. Behavior change is complex, but there are evidence-based approaches that we can use. And these will be different in each place and in each context. But if we use the tools available wisely, then the benefits for cats and the communities they live with will be profound. Thank you.
How many times have I heard we must educate people to not do something or to change their ways, but does giving people information change behaviour? If that's the case, we would all eat the right amount of healthy food and take plenty of exercise. Life, the human condition, is more complicated than that, as Harry has shown. Are you struggling to get people to do something specific in your cat population management programme? Maybe you work in a shelter and you're trying to engage your local community to neuter their pets. How's that going? What will you do differently as a result of listening to Harry? Take a minute to reflect. Welcome back. Whatever you do in your work with unowned cats, you will inevitably have to engage with your community. Here is Jenny Cotterell from Australia talking about how best to do this.
Hi, my name's Jenny Cotterell and I am here to talk to you today about community engagement and coming in from Australia. So what we're going to cover today are really community needs planning, the principles of community engagement, how these principles aligned with the spay and neuter program that I ran, and the outcomes of that spay and neuter program. My background's firstly from animal welfare, working in shelters and pounds, and then worked a further 22 years in animal control or animal management as we call it here in Australia. I worked in the field where most of our interactions were face-to-face with community members. Most people were happy to talk, especially about the cats they own, but can be a bit wary of giving details of the exact number of cats they have or they are feeding. For us to assist people with these cats, we need them to be honest with us and let us know exactly how many cats they have, so we can provide the correct advice that's needed to manage them. So working with cats is really only half of our role. The communicating with people is equally as important and the other half. So why is it important? Because people are not only the cause of cat-associated issues, but they are also the solution to these issues. In Australia, we don't have programs such as Trap Neuter Return or Return to Field, so we need to think a little more outside the box as to how we can run spay and neuter programs that are within the constraints of our cat laws. So ultimately, we're giving people the tools to make informed decisions for what is best for not only their cats, but the community cats. So how do we know where to start? Community needs planning involves identifying specific needs of the community in relation to cat welfare and understanding the current resources and support available, if there are any, to address these needs. By conducting a community needs assessment, a simple but effective way to find out about your target location or community, especially if you're not familiar with it, is to gather information online for these locations. Gather data that is already available on cat intake and owner surrenders from shelters and pounds. Look at where locations of these cats are coming from. There's a great place to start. Then look at who your community are. What are the barriers they have for spay and neuter programs? Are there any other welfare organisations nearby that you can partner with to reduce these barriers? So the importance of these 6 community engagement principles lies in their ability to enhance the effectiveness and sustainability of community programs. So how did I implement a cat spay and neuter program using these 6 principles? In 2012 in Australia, the council management of stray cats is trapping and impounding them. After 20 years in field of seeing the problem that was not reducing, I decided to change how cats were managed in the community, implementing a free spay and neuter program for owned and stray cats, including microchipping, council licensing and free transport for the cats to the clinic. If this was free, my thoughts were, maybe we could get all the people who had been feeding cats for extended periods of time to become their owners and take responsibility for them. There were 3 suburbs that had the highest number of cat-related complaints, and these 3 suburbs were the source of majority of the pound intake. These were also the 3 most disadvantaged suburbs within the community, and the complaint and intake data gathered from my community needs planning backed up this observation. The RSPCA had a mobile vet clinic which had never been used, so they agreed to all on my wish list and to sterilise 40 cats for our budget as a starting point. This spay and neuter program implemented initially started with the properties in the 3 disadvantaged suburbs only. An example of that is a picture on the left, which is a typical social housing unit complex within our disadvantaged suburbs, and the picture on the right is 10 minutes down the road, photo of the advantaged areas that we have with the multi-million-dollar properties. So it's a very unique council area that you go from disadvantaged to advantaged in a matter of minutes driving. So initially, the properties we targeted were the properties in the disadvantaged area that we'd been picking up unwanted litters of kittens from, and people who could never afford to pay to get their cats, or cats they were feeding spayed or neutered. In these suburbs, I learnt that the people who were feeding the stray cats really cared for them, but many didn't seek actively to take on a cat. But given the high turnover in residents in social housing, cats would be abandoned, and the others who moved in, the new tenants, would start feeding them. Initially, cat owners and carers were hesitant to enrol their cats, or to be honest about how many cats they needed to enrol, as enforcement of cat legislation was technically one of my main roles, which meant the community saw me initially as a fine giver and not someone to be helpful. So this program required us to be transparent and honest to gain trust, especially as residents trusted us to transport their cats to the clinics and bring them home safely. That enrolling cats and taking ownership was their decision, with no barriers that could make people say no to the program. So I made an effort to speak to everyone that I could, preferring face-to-face communication wherever possible. I created a simple flyer with basic information, as you can see, but I discovered that some of the adults in my target area couldn't read. Therefore, talking to the people directly was the best method of communication in these disadvantaged areas. Being present in the streets and engaging face-to-face was crucial. Active listening and our reactions play an important role in communication. Other forms of communication then, when the program went citywide, included social media and the council newsletters, especially as the program expanded to reach the broader audience. This was more formal communication that was developed by the communications team. I began working with the local community centre, support services and social workers who had already established relationships within the community. I collaborated with the police and designated RSPCA inspector, frequently dealing with the same properties with animal welfare issues. By partnering with social housing services and housing officers, we created practical solutions for tenants and pets, enrolling cats in the spay and neuter program. Actively listening helped me understand others' perspectives, leading to productive discussions and decisions. Clear messaging ensured effective communication, reducing misunderstandings, constructive conflict resolution was essential for maintaining positive relationships and achieving positive outcomes. In 2015, I transitioned the program to be managed by local vets, ensuring residents had ease of access to after-hours care for their cats. I facilitated the process by acting as the contact person between residents, coordinating with the vet clinics to schedule appointments, and I was still a transportation person when needed for cats. Referrals started coming in from other agencies such as police, social services, mental health teams. They would inform me about properties with cats and ask owners if their cats were sterilised. If not, they would pass on their details to me. I would then contact them and enrol their cats in the program. Positive interactions with community members who'd participated already led to more referrals, reducing the number of unsterilised kittens being given away. Through education and outreach and communication, we promoted a more compassionate community for all. This program became a collective issue rather than an individual one. Effective collaboration setup is essential for success and sustainability of your program. When working with community programs, it's important to assess where you're at with your programs and do that regularly, and also be adaptable because no two situations are ever the same. Overall, the feedback from this program has been very positive, and especially with the effects it's had on people's health and well-being and the cats in the community. So really, what was the outcome of our program? And that was 869 cats got spayed and neutered. A referral source is how we became for all animal welfare issues. So whether it be dogs, cats, it did not matter. We built great relationships that were pretty established with the community. We had established ongoing partnerships with not only social services, but also the vet clinics, police, rescue groups, shelters, anyone and everyone that had been involved. They saw us as the go-to people when it came to animals in the community, not just cats. But with this program, it did, over an 8-year period, decreased our cat intake by 66%. It decreased our cat euthanasia by 82%, and it reduced our cat-related complaints by 36%. So it was very successful. So what were the key learnings and outcomes for us for this program? And that was really the community partnerships are essential for the success of cat programs. The partnerships that we had helped reach the wider audience and also gave us access to additional resources, and effective communication and collaboration are most certainly the key in building strong partnerships. Thanks very much for listening and having me today. And if you have any further questions or would like to get in touch, I've included my email addresses. Thank you.
I think after listening to Harry and now Jenny, we're beginning to realise that the key to engaging with any stakeholder is not to talk, but to listen. Once we take time to listen, we understand why people hold particular views and what matters to them. We can then work with our communities by approaching the situation from the perspectives that resonate most with them. Let's reflect for a moment. Do you engage well with your community? Do you take time to listen to their concerns and opinions so you can best work with them to achieve your goals? Has Jenny given you some new ideas about how you might work with your community? You can take a minute, or you can take a bit longer, as we're going to have our first 10-minute break of the day. See you shortly. It's not just the community, there are other stakeholders to consider. How many of you are currently tackling the difficult issue, for example, of the anti-cat lobby, concerned about the impact cats have on wildlife? It's a valid concern. So how do you manage these tricky conversations? To give us some insight into this, we're going to listen to Yaiza Gomez Mejias, Manuela Rowlings, Agnes Dufau, and Sarah Zito, all experienced in these conversations, to discuss how to engage with stakeholders where there are strongly opposing views.
Heard from Jenny how impactful and important it is to get the local community involved in population management. But of course, there are wider stakeholder groups when we are talking about stakeholder engagement. And how do you identify those stakeholders? I'm guessing this is dependent on the issue that you're addressing. It may be very local, regional, or even national. So would you like to start, Manuela, with your input?
Sure, with pleasure. So at For Pause, we actually have quite, I would say, formal and strategic process to working with stakeholders. So we do a lot of planning upfront, and we have a tool that we call a stakeholder mapping. We have come up with that quite recently because initially our focus was working directly in the communities. And so in the communities, of course, we had the various stakeholders. We put them on a board, we put them in the room together, and we had very direct discussions. But now we see that a lot of the issues could also be addressed on national level. And thus we are doing this formal stakeholder mapping, where we are really trying to think about all the forces that would influence cat populations. And we really use a big board. We put all of them on there. It's quite an extensive exercise, but it is definitely worth it to think about who will be help us in terms of reducing cat population, and what could be the opponents or people that might not be particularly happy with our approach or our wishes and our directions, and who might be the neutral ones.
And Sarah, how have you approached potential stakeholders and start building relationships with them?
Due to the diversity of stakeholders in the field of cat population management, I really feel that each stakeholder requires some pretty thoughtful consideration about how to approach them and build a relationship that's going to work for that specific stakeholder. So once I've identified who the relevant stakeholders are, and Manuela gave us a really good introduction on how you might do that, for me the next step is to get informed about their perspective and their approach to the issue that we're going to talk about. Then I consider what common ground we share, and this may include what concerns we share, what outcomes we both want to see, and what relationships we have in common. And then I can tailor the approach to that stakeholder accordingly. So, for example, we may share concerns about cat welfare, and we may also share concerns about the welfare and conservation of wildlife. We might both aspire to achieving cat population management outcomes that will contribute to positive progress on both those concerns, even if initially the way we might think about how we're going to achieve those is quite different. We may also have a working relationship with another stakeholder who could facilitate constructive communication and help us foster a relationship, and that can be a really helpful avenue in some circumstances when you don't already have a clear approach to the stakeholder that you're wanting to engage with. And then I think that When you actually make the approach, for me, it's really important that we focus on our common goals and a respect and acknowledgement and understanding of the other's perspective. I like to think about keeping a learner's mind and holding the belief really strongly that we can find that common ground and a constructive approach that will bridge the differences that we have. I think that making the assumption that your way is the only way and writing off others and their approach or perspective really makes meaningful engagement almost impossible. So having that sort of more constructive approach where you actually believe that the other person is going to meet you somewhere and you can find that common way forward is absolutely key.
What in your experience have been those subjects that you are most likely to see opposing views?
Most commonly, in my experience, it's been opposing views when it comes to ways of managing cat populations while still conserving native species. And for us in Australia, that's in particular regarding trap, neuter and return. And also for us, mandatory cat containment is another issue where there's pretty polarised views.
How about you, Agnes?
Well, it's exactly the same issue. We've been fighting to get the law, the national law, for cats in Spain, and one of the worst, people we had to convince, and I think we did not manage to convince yet, have been the conservationists and biologists who have been using a lot of so-called scientific publications from Australia and other places to say that this was not, TNR was not applicable in Spain. And it has been really, I think, at the national level, that has been the worst. The most difficult part of this fight, because I cannot find another word. It's been really tough. And at a local level, it's always neighbors who do not understand exactly what we want to do, how we want to do it. And we need to explain and discuss. And usually it's quite easy, with some exceptions, but neighbors understand what is the objective, and the objective is to reduce and to control the population. Conservationists do not want, I think, to understand it, and we're saying a lot in the press that we wanted to promote cat colonies, and that has been really tough to manage for all the NGOs involved and the government, the Spanish government too.
In Eastern Europe, we still face a situation where sterilization is not widely accepted. It's quite interesting that we actually sometimes have opposing views between cat feeders and then I would say that the more cat carers that are willing to provide veterinary care. We had such an incident just a couple of weeks ago where cat feeders actively sabotaged the work of the cat carers that were trying to trap the cats to provide sterilization and other veterinary care for them. And this is a classic situation where for us, it's really important to get two stakeholders in the room and to explain what the other one actually wants to achieve, because both have the best interest of the cats at heart. Both actually want to achieve good welfare, but there is strong distrust between the two groups. And so in such a case, I think it's really, really essential that we can facilitate those two groups to speak with each other and find that common goal, and then both work proactively towards it instead of sabotaging each other.
Yeah, at least to facilitate the conversation or the debate. Yeah, yes. It's like I think we all started working in this area because we love cats, but at the end of the day, you have to like humans as well and understand them and understand human communication, how it works and how emotional it can be sometimes. Yeah. And in these debates, in your experience, has science-based evidence been helpful when working with these stakeholders with opposing views?
So I do think science-based evidence is extremely important. And as an organization, we go to great lengths to also collect data. So to collect data in terms of sterilization percentage of a colony, in terms of, but also a lot of data on stakeholders. So we do detailed surveys, for example, with veterinarians or with cat owners to understand their attitudes and behaviors. But my perception is that data really is only, it's for especially cats, is a bit lacking behind of the data that we have for dog management. And so I think we don't have enough convincing, really large-scale TNR examples yet that show that TNR ultimately is successful. And yes, it's complicated because we know that when we look at cat colonies, it's not just the colonies that are already on the street. We know that there is very strong dynamics between the owned cats and the sterilization rates of the owned cats and the sterilization age of the owned cats, and then the cats that we are finding being outside and being homeless often. So yes, data is wonderful, and I wish we had more, and I wish we had more on a large scale. And we are working very strongly towards that, so that we can really have very rock solid cases when we speak to decision makers. Because of course, I find it fair enough that governments and political leaders put their resources in solutions that clearly work and are and it is possible to implement those effective and efficiently.
Well, I agree that science-based evidence is fundamental, and obviously as a scientist, it's key to my existence. But I also think that just presenting people with evidence is often not enough on its own. We've got to find ways to communicate the evidence effectively and link it to the outcomes that are the common ground that we share, because it's not just about facts. It's also this sort of more nebulous piece about changing hearts and minds and how we, so bring people on that journey with us so we all come to the same place. We all mostly want the same thing, which is to improve the welfare of animals, whether that be cats or wildlife, and usually the outcome that we want is actually the same. It's just different ways of looking at how to get there. So the evidence is helpful, but it's not enough on its own, sadly.
Yes, I fully agree with Manuela and Sarah. We need to generate more scientific publications on TNR. Effects, that's for sure. We've been using quite a lot of publications of Julie Levy and the team, our publication on the height protein regime for cats for them to have a lower predation impact, and all those publications on high intensity TNR program in some countries. So we are using the publications which are usually in English and from abroad and from far away. What we need to do now is to generate our own scientific publications with your help, probably. We are working on it, and you know that some vets in Canarias are working to generate publications. It's really key, because in front of us, we've got people always talking about scientific publication from Australia, because that's key. And we need to have more to support TNR in our situation in Spain, and responsible ownership as part of a cat population management program as a whole, because that's what we need to do. We need to tackle also responsible ownership, and I think there's less information on responsible ownership for cats than on TNR, which means there is nothing.
Cat population management is one of those so-called wicked problems that, there is no simple solution to it. But I completely agree with Manuela. It can't be a a one-stop short-term solution. As long as we have cats, it has to be an ongoing effort, and it has to be resourced appropriately, and that generally means that government has to be involved in some way. And when that doesn't happen, unfortunately, you get these real sort of ups and downs in cat management. You get sort of a push and things improve, and then there's even just a few cats left, and then more cats join that colony, and then it goes up again. And so there's this constant sort of up and down. Whereas if we could find a steady state where there was ongoing assistance both to people to responsibly own cats and have them sterilised so they're not contributing to semi-owned and unowned cat populations, but also the inevitable unowned and semi-owned cat populations that will be there anyway are also managed humanely, then to me that would be the best outcome for all involved.
In Rome, in Italy, they know that they've been starting colonies in 1991, and they still have to neuter some cats because they say, the city council say, because of the immigration of new cats, of unresponsible ownership in Italy. So it's really, I think we know that, but we need to be maybe clearer when we explain it to government.
And getting back to the conflicted views, when we talk to the government or anyone involved in the work of these public institutions, how have you handled the collaboration of groups with contradictory values and views? Maybe you can comment on some tips or examples where collaboration has been successful in your experience.
Well, let's say it's been successful because yes, we've got now a national law which contemplates TNR at a national level and cat responsible ownership. So yes, it has been a success. And the tips, I think it's very basic. It's listen to every stakeholder to know their point of view, and try to explain and focus all the communication on the common objectives. Let people talk, explain, express their emotions, because this is an emotional issue. That's very clear. And on our side, very much emotional. So we need everybody to be able to talk. The TNR program was going to start, and usually it's okay. What we are facing is this lack of dialogue with conservationists. That's really difficult. We've tried to do some things to invite, for example, biologists like John Boone to our feline conference, and that was a success. But we still haven't managed to get a Spanish biologist okay to participate to a feline conference, which is something quite interesting, I think.
It's a very controversial topic at times, isn't it? And like you said, a very emotionally charged one. Yeah. Maybe one tip that I can add is we have been very lucky when working with governments or also with municipalities to very often find key opinion leaders that were willing to push projects for the welfare of cats. And I think this has been really instrumental within institutions to have one or two people that really want to focus on such a project. I think it's completely understandable that institutions or municipalities or national level governments have a lot on their plates. They have many, many different topics that they need to fix. And usually in Eastern Europe, dogs are a bit higher on the agenda because they cause more conflict with the communities. And so cats are really, really, really on the bottom. But having a few people that really champion the approach, that puts the project back up higher on the agenda, has proven really, really successful.
Something that I've found helpful is to really focus on building that respectful and constructive relationship with the different people in the group. It doesn't happen overnight. It does take a lot of time and effort and integrity so that you sort of listen to each other you accept that we can all learn from each other and be open to those diverse perspectives, and actually show that you are listening and open to learning from each other. Takes a lot of patience, but when those really difficult topics come up, I think having that sort of element of trust between the group members, even if you don't always agree, definitely helps. The other thing that I feel is helpful is framing things in a positive light, so using positive messaging, so what we should or can do, what we want to achieve, rather than focusing on that sort of more negative messaging, telling people what they can't do, what they shouldn't do, what they're doing wrong. I think that really helps to, I suppose, progress things in the right direction and make people feel like they can actually achieve what we're doing. They're not just being told what they can't do or what they're doing wrong.
So, Agnes, what opposing views did you encounter in your work to help develop the new animal welfare law in Spain, and how did you manage them?
Well, we had the conservationists on one side and the hunters on the other side, sometimes together. So what did happen? I mean, in Spain, we had a lot of regional laws with TNR in the animal protection laws in many regions in Spain until last year, when we did get this national law at national level for the protection, I mean, the control of the feline population with TNR and cat responsible ownership, because we've got neutering and identification, mandatory neutering and identification of all cats in Spain, which is something totally unusual. And TNR as a mandatory program for all municipalities in Spain, which is just amazing. Well, we did get your help too, yeah, International Cat Care, in one or two very, very key moments to convince the government that was really the way, and thank you for that. So what we've been doing is talking in positive, as Sarah said, and in a constructive way to say that's what we need to do, because until last year, what has been done is TNR in many cities like Barcelona since 2012. So there is a knowledge about TNR in Spain really quite high, with public funding, because it's Barcelona, it's Madrid, so big cities. So what we've managed to do is to explain that this could work with sufficient public funding and with methodology. I mean, there are 15 million cats in France, 15 million versus 8 million dogs. So the cat population is just increasing everywhere. And the traditional policies to catch and kill obviously did not work. So let's try something else. That was really the way we had to say, okay, well, let's give it a go. I mean, let's do it.
And when it comes to the dialogue between stakeholders, how do you create that safe space for everyone to share their views without it getting heated?
I think a lot of the stuff that we've spoken about already, with sort of having that respect for and understanding of diverse opinions and perspectives, really helps. But I think perhaps starting out at the very beginning is having what I'd call rules of engagement, so to speak. So really setting the tone and the expectations for those group conversations, that you are respectful to others, that you do listen, and that you're not allowing things to get out of control. And if everyone knows that and they agree to that at the outset, it's everybody's responsibility to keep to that. And then you can all remind others in a polite, respectful way that you need to keep to that. So it kind of becomes a group responsibility to keep things safe and keep things constructive, as opposed to perhaps letting things go off the rails a little bit.
Sarah, I'm curious to ask you, when you're facilitating these discussions, are you doing this in person or are you doing this online? I'm asking because I fully agree with what you said, and this is our approach as well. And we felt that this was really successful when we could bring everybody together in a room. And then COVID came along, and for a long, long time, it was not possible anymore to put everybody back into a room. And so we experimented with doing meetings online, working with WhatsApp groups, all kinds of other types of engagement. But I don't think we have found that, golden nugget yet on how to do it perfectly. And workshops in person are, of course, very resource intense. So I'm quite curious what your experience around this is.
Yeah, I would agree with you that in person it's usually easier because people tend to, I suppose you pick up on those sort of more subtle social cues. You're possibly less likely to misinterpret people's approach. And it's also, I'd say, just generally more challenging online to communicate effectively without that sort of, I suppose, camaraderie that you get when you're in person. But I think, and goodness knows we don't always get it right, but I have certainly been in some groups, and I think it helps to have a good facilitator and somebody who is very upfront at the beginning about the way things are going to go.
Agnes already mentioned that killing has been tried for many, many years and clearly doesn't work. And I wanted to mention another very emotional topic, which is sheltering. And in Eastern Europe, we are in the lucky position that there are almost no cat shelters, which we actually we find that very positive and a big opportunity to push for TNR instead of long-term sheltering for cats. And I think this is one of the learnings that we can bring to these discussions, because we have this example of dog sheltering. It has been practiced for many, many decades now and clearly is also not working. And so I think bringing it back then from a sometimes very emotional discussion, finding again the common ground, saying, this is the direction that we all can agree on. And sometimes this could just be streets without cats. We have sometimes people that are not into cat welfare, and the only thing that could motivate them is to have cleaner streets. And this is okay, because if this means that, we reduce the population sustainably and humanely, it will eventually result in cleaner streets. And so if this is the smallest thing that we can agree on, there's something that we can work towards. We are very lucky, I feel sometimes, to be well connected internationally and to have all of these wonderful best practice examples from all over the world that we can also bring to national and municipal and sometimes very small local stakeholder groups. And it's really helpful to have this wide knowledge base and to be able to pick appropriate examples and to bring them into the local context. I do see in Eastern Europe that language is still a very big barrier. So there is a lot of information available in English, but not necessarily in all the local languages. And so I really feel fortunate that sometimes we can bring these very small examples that make a big difference and that sometimes make an immediate difference in the welfare of the cats and also in the well-being of the community. And I'm very grateful to have these international connections.
Just picking up on that note about the positive messaging and so on, I think getting science communicators, educators and behaviour change experts involved has been something that has been extremely useful, and I would like to see more of, and bringing in those social scientists and behaviour change scientists as well to just plan those effective in interventions and public engagement and education programs in a way that they're across the evidence in their spaces to know how to make those things happen. We're across the evidence in terms of what do we need to do with the cat populations and technically to make this happen, but we don't always have that sort of bridge to how do we change people's hearts and minds and bring them, along with us and help them to understand why and how to do something. And something that sort of follows on a little bit from that, and something that that we've found, for example, if you do a behaviour change campaign, our example would be trying to get people to de-sex their cats prior to puberty. If you haven't looked at what's going to happen downstream and make sure that the capacity is there so the vets are willing and able to de-sex the cats before puberty or de-sex the cats in the TNR programs, you're going to get people asking vets to do these things and then no one's there to do it. So then you're setting people up to fail and get frustrated. So I think making sure that you've got that downstream capacity before you do the piece around getting people to do what you're hoping they'll do is really important as well.
For me, it's like a puzzle almost, and all these puzzle pieces need to fit and fall in place perfectly for us to achieve our goal. And like Sarah said, we need to be aware of these puzzle pieces in order to help putting them together. So really having a long breath, being willing to engage in programs that might take a decade or might take more than a decade. We know that behavior change is not a quick solution, but hopefully an impactful one in the long run. So seeing the big picture, but also not making it too complicated so that we are paralyzed and not able to jump into action. Sometimes maybe exploring and experimenting and then taking the learning and doing better next time is the way to go.
That's a wonderful conclusion for this discussion.
You may never have taken time out before to think of the complexity of this situation. It's not just cat lovers whose role it is to improve cat welfare and manage cat populations more effectively. There are numerous stakeholders: national government, local government, law enforcement agencies, universities, the veterinary profession, local businesses, the community, potentially so many people who need to engage and play a part. And of course, all those stakeholders and within each group, they all have different views and opinions. Let's take our minute to think about this. What stakeholder group do you struggle with? How might you engage them better in the future? Welcome back. Now we move on to focus on working with cats in shelters or homing centres. We're going to introduce you to cat-friendly homing, the model that iCatCare developed in collaboration with many experts from within the sector, which puts the cat front and centre of everything. Here is Lindsay Narroway from Canada to give you her take on cat-friendly homing after participating in a coaching programme with iCatCare to make her shelter more cat-friendly.
Thank you very much for my introduction, and I'm honored to be here today as part of our first ever online conference, and more importantly, to have the opportunity to introduce you to cat-friendly homing. During today's talk, I want each of you to really think about this one question. Am I always doing what's best for the cat? At first glance, I'm sure that we all say, yes, of course I'm doing that. But I really want you to dig deeper and think about all of the decisions that we make at our shelters on our daily basis. And are they really what's in the best interest? Or sometimes, are we making decisions emotionally or financially? Or sometimes maybe we're making our decisions based on things and processes that we've been doing for years and they've just been working. So that's the question that I want you to always come back to as I do my talk today. So today's presentation will be broken up into 4 parts. And I'm hoping that by the end that you're going to know a little bit about my personal and professional journey with cat-friendly homing. So today I'm going to go over our 20-week online program that I had the unique opportunity to be able to take and learn, basically introduce me to exactly what cat-friendly homing is, and which brings me here today. I'm going to explain the 7 principles of cat-friendly homing. I'm going to summarize the 3 main areas, and hopefully by the end of my presentation, you're going to understand what's important about them and the benefits of cat-friendly homing. So before I go any further, this is our cat named Shade. I am going to talk about her a little later on, so you're going to see her throughout the presentation. But before we move on, I want you to take a look at her photo and just think about her first impressions. What is the first impression that you see of her just based on this photo? I'm like looking at her beautiful yellow eyes, her pudgy cheeks, and I'm like, oh, you pose so cute for the camera. You are the sweetest little girl. So back in 2022, I blindly applied for this online course that was offered through Maddie's Fund. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with Maddie's Fund, and many of you may have also applied for the same course. It was this cat-friendly homing course. I'd never heard about it before, but I've worked in the industry for over 20 years, and I've taken lots of training, and I'm always up for something different. So after I applied, I didn't give it much thought. I was finally accepted. I received this email, and it started telling me what to expect about this program. They said it was going to be 20 weeks. It was intensive and interactive. But the most important take home is that I had to be committed. So that freaked me out a little. And I thought, you know what? Yes, I'm going to commit. I'm going to try something a little bit outside of my box and just see what happens. The worst thing that can happen from this 20-week program is that I've learned nothing. So I also have a very small staff who have also, just like me, worked in the industry for a long time. So a lot of them are very sort of set in their ways. They like to do one way, the way that they learned, right, 20 years ago. So I decided once I got this course that it was imperative that I include my entire team. Because it's such a small team, it made it fairly easy for me. But I wanted to make sure that whatever we were learning, that it wasn't just me, but that we were all collectively learning and that we were going to have that buy-in and be able to hopefully make the change and see things together and learn together. So how we did this was through this weekly mentorship program. And I was fortunate enough to work with Vicki Halls, who you met yesterday. And I met with her every week and we went through our homework. We discussed what we had learned from the modules. There were some weeks that I just met with her and some weeks where I included my staff. And what really came out of it was real life changes. By meeting with Vicki every week, it really gave the program this accountability. I've done a ton of programs that I've learned and done training where it's just online and you do it independently. But I found because I had to meet with her, I was like, I have to do this. I have to make sure that we are doing this. If we didn't have that component, I really actually think that the program wouldn't be such a success for us. So I went to the program with very low expectations, but at the end was pleasantly surprised with everything that I'd learned about it. So cat-friendly homing and the course is designed to basically examine what's working in our shelters and what's not working. But what is so fascinating is that it's done in this inclusive and non-judgmental way. So what are the core principles of cat-friendly homing? Before I get started, I want to just let you know, when I first started and I learned about this, I thought it was going to be all about trap, neuter, release, and it's not. So for those of you that were thinking that and like, oh, okay, I already do this, I'm not going to learn anything, you will. So cat-friendly homing understands that we're all coming from all across the world. We all have our own laws. We all have our own policies and bylaws and procedures. And what is interesting is that it's all about what is doing what is best for the cat. and it's guided by these 7 principles. So the first one is admit wisely. And what that means is think ahead. How are we going to plan for each cat? I'm going to talk about that at the next slide. Treat our cats as individuals. So some of our shelters, you might see 500 or more cats in a year, but we have to make sure that we are treating every single one of those cats differently for their unique needs. Minimizing time in our care. That is a key component. Any cat that's entering into our facilities should be staying for as short a time as possible. We should be starting to look at this as not a destination, but part of the cat's journey. Population control, I'm sure we are all already doing that. We need to make sure that our animals are sterilized before we place them out into their future homes. We need to make sure we're working to actually be part of fixing the problem. And at the end of the day, making sure that we are rehoming our animals to suit their unique needs. So what else is really unique about the program is although it's called cat-friendly homing, these exact same principles apply for us that are housing dogs or small animals or even large animals. So that was a really interesting take home that I was able to actually apply all of this knowledge to so many other areas within my shelter. So I don't have time to go in depth into all of these 7 principles, but I am going to highlight 3 key areas in the next few slides. So the first area I'm going to talk about is the intake. So I come from a shelter where we have open intake. We take in strays, owner surrenders. We also have a contract with another municipality. So when I first heard intake wisely, I'm like, well, I kind of just have to intake whatever's coming to me. But what I learned is that it's not that. It means that we have to really think about and plan what we're going to do. So it's okay if you're coming from a place where you have an open intake and we have to take all of your animals. But you need to plan ahead and you need to think, what are we going to do in our care? If I have a very shy cat that's not adjusting in my facility, do I have a foster program set up? Do I even have a foster family who can take them in? The other thing that it really helped me learn about was the intake forms. That is an opportunity for us to gain as much information about each of those cats. So questions like, do you let your cats outside? Or what does your cat do when people first enter the home? So that one about letting your cats outside is actually pretty amazing because it's going to give us that insight to know once we start placing that cat, is it going to be a door dasher? And I'm sure we've all seen those door dashers. And this image, I'm sure you've also already seen. I believe you saw it yesterday. And it speaks to the various types of cats that we all are seeing in our shelters. The one area that really resonated with me is the in-betweener cats. And this is where cat-friendly homing, they coined this phrase. And I'm going to go out on the limb and say that at least, and this is on the very low side, probably 50% of our cats that we see end up being these in-betweeners. We tend to use words like they're going to come around, they're spicy. That's the big word that we use now in the industry. But I want us to really take a moment, and I want you to take a moment and think about, do you have any of those in-betweeners? Do we have these cats that we are pushing through our programs and that we're trying to find homes for that maybe they're happier doing something a little bit different? So the in-betweener was something, it was just a light bulb that popped up as soon as I learned about this. And it was like, wow. So this is Shade. You should remember her from a few slides ago. We did have her up for adoption a few months ago. And this is her adoption story. So we said she's sweet. She's really curious. She came from living in a barn. She was really shy when she first came in, and she's starting to become more confident. So this is probably, probably a very similar description that many of you start to put out, where we're not really talking very much about the cat. We're saying these little things, but we're dancing around, right? What is the cat really like? Nowhere have I said she's sweet, she's cuddly. So I wanted you to think about the types of adoption profiles that you're putting out there. And are they actually helping the cat? The next area we're going to talk about is care. So the most important aspect is really making sure that we were looking at the mental and physical well-being of every single cat that comes in. So the course taught me a lot about this traffic light assessment. So we do exams on all of our animals and all of our cats. But this traffic light assessment really brought to light the importance of us evaluating from day one how the cats are adjusting in our facility. It also talks about how quickly these cats are going to adjust through the facility, and helps us evaluate and make sure that we're not forgetting about some of those cats that sometimes are a little bit shy and aren't sort of processing and getting to that point of adoption and getting really social quickly. The traffic light assessment was a huge tool for me. We also learned about the design of facilities and the importance of it. One of the things was co-housing. Previous to this, we always put cats out together and we co-housed them and had them run around in playrooms. We learned, and it brought us back to understanding that cats aren't the same as dogs. Cats are independent. Dogs love their play groups. They love being with everyone. So that was a huge adjustment of us really starting to recognize what is a cat and are we doing the right things for our cats? Not to say that we don't have cat play groups, because we do for those social ones, and definitely with kittens where it's really needed. Also looking at the spread of disease. We know that stress brings disease. So are we minimizing our stress? How many animals are we housing in the shelter? Are we vaccinating on intake? The noise levels. Thinking about when we're opening and closing the doors, what is that like for the cat? Even our voices, and my voice is quite loud. When I'm in the cat room and I'm trying to talk, am I actually scaring some cats? I probably am. And then the last component is the cat-friendly interaction. Making sure that we're respecting our cat's needs, that we're looking at the appropriate touch zones, we're minimizing the contact. If they don't want us talking and touching them, maybe we really shouldn't be forcing these types of things on them. And then the other aspect of it that was also a light bulb moment was just remembering that when we're seeing a cat purring, it doesn't always mean that that cat is happy in our facility. So along with the care, it was also letting cats hide. So this course reminded me that you cannot change a cat's personality, but what you can do is help their stress levels. It's taught us the importance of allowing the cat to hide. Prior to taking this course, we used to have nervous cats, and we would think if we gave them a hiding spot, they're going to hide forever and we're never going to get them adopted. And we would pick them up and manhandle them. Through the course, we actually did our own little in-house testing, and we found out that we were completely wrong. Allowing a cat to hide gives them a choice, and it allows them to have that coping mechanism, which is going to actually allow them to adjust and process, and then hopefully get through our shelter facilities and into their next stage of their life that much quicker. It also taught us that, again, you can't change their personality. So when you get those really shy cats that are hiding from day one, and by day 3, day 7, and day 10, they're still hiding, they are always going to hide. So you don't have to have a really nice hiding area like we have here with the Cranda bed that you can see. You can have a blanket. You can also you can see this little cat has a box. So it doesn't really matter what you have. It also is really good to look at these portal holes. Portal holes also allow our cats to have choice and minimize their contact. We put them into our like 30 by 30 cages, and they really have very limited choice. We provide them with food, water, shelter at the times we choose. So allowing them to use that portal hole and come through when they don't want to is also a huge, huge stress reliever for a lot of cats. And again, it doesn't need to be anything special. If all you have is a box, give the cat a box. Give it a spot to get as low as possible and start to feel comfortable in its surroundings. So this is Jade again. So going back to allowing cats to hide in our traffic light assessments, this was Jade on day 1. You can see she was terrified. We did end up giving her this a hiding area just so that you don't feel like, oh my goodness. So she did have one, but this photo was taken basically as soon as we brought her in. And you could see the difference in her from day 1 to day 14. By day 14, she's coming out of the cage, she's staring at the camera, and she has adjusted to our facility so much better. The last area that we're going to talk about is the outcome. So what is best for all of the cats? So we know that the cats that are suitable for pets, they're the easy ones. Those are the ones we can take to our satellite adoption sites. We can find them homes with families really well. What about the cats that aren't suitable for pets? We need to look for something called this alternative lifestyle. And the two areas that I like to think about for this are a barn cat program or trap, neuter, release, or return to field. The other part of the outcome, and the difficult part that a lot of us don't ever want to talk about, are the cats that aren't adjusting in their environment, and recognizing that an outcome of euthanasia is sometimes the best option. I'd like to think about having a cat sit in a cage for years and years without getting out into its family. What is better, living in a cage? Something for you to think about. Have you done this in your facilities? And we've all done this. So I'm sure when you're thinking about it, it's like, oh yeah, I have had these cats that we thought would come around, sitting around. And it's all about learning, and it's about education and changing sometimes the practices and processes that we do. So the traditional adoption, this is a cat named Oreo. You can see she loves people. She has no problem adjusting into her new environment. She jumps on the furniture. That was literally 3 days, I think, after she got into her new home. She can do all the same things that allow her to be a cat. She's sunbathing. She's looking outside, and she's doing all these things in a nice, safe manner. The other part are the alternative lifestyle. So what we ended up doing as a result of the program was creating this program, a formalized program called our Barn Cat program. Previously to this, we didn't really have much of anything. We would just get on the phone and start calling around to local barns. So what we did was we created a dedicated webpage where we explained to members of the public why we are doing this and why we're placing these cats into this type of a lifestyle. We've created this online formal application form, which has really streamlined the process. And we've also taken to social media to start to get the word out. That was an area we were a little worried about at the beginning, but we've had complete positive experiences. And we've also created an alternative placement database. And this has streamlined getting our cats into their placements so much faster. Speaking of alternative lifestyles, this is one of our most recent ones. This is a local greenhouse who grows their own lettuce. You can see this is our cat that we have here. She's got food, water, plenty of room to run around and explore. What I didn't tell you is that this is Shade, and she's an in-betweener. Although very photogenic, we would often unnecessarily swat at my staff. We could only touch her actually only on her own terms. So we placed her up for adoption, hoping we'd find that needle in the haystack and we'd find that perfect adopter. By February, we decided to place her into her alternative lifestyle program. And I think you can see that she's loving her life. We received a success story back in March. And it was also really interesting because when we receive these success stories, they're just as exciting as the ones that we get from our pet adopters. So this is our second cat that we've taken to the greenhouse, and they've already agreed to take on more, which has proven to be an amazing partnership for us. So I hope my presentation has given you just a little introduction into what I've learned about cat-friendly homing and the importance of always doing what is always best for our cats. My contact information is below if anyone would like to reach out to me for any questions. Thank you again for listening to me today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Who better to give you an overview of cat-friendly homing than someone who has gone through the process in their own shelter? Cat-friendly homing is about ensuring that you have a plan for every cat that comes into your care. Where is this particular cat going? And how can I ensure he or she gets there as soon as possible? We should only be taking in cats that are suitable to be pets, and if others slip through the net, we need to swiftly find them a solution that meets their individual needs. Take a moment to think about Lindsay's presentation. What resonated with you? How could you work more effectively? Is there something you could action straight away that could improve the well-being of the cats in your care? While you're doing that, let's take a break. We have a 30-minute break now for you to use however you like. Have a drink, something to eat, play with your cat. See you shortly. Welcome back. For the rest of today, we will be focusing on each aspect of cat-friendly homing: the intake process, the care you provide, and the outcome you choose for each cat. Let's hear from Kim Horsford, one of the early developers of cat-friendly homing. Kim is going to talk to us about the intake process within cat-friendly homing.
Hello, and welcome to Cat-Friendly Homing. My name's Kim, and I'm going to be talking about intake, admit wisely. The decision to admit a cat to a homing centre is multifaceted, and so we need to take into account many, sometimes conflicting issues. So we think about, what do we know about cats as a species? What do we know about the cats in the area we're working in? What do we know about this particular cat? And what's happening in our centre? What impact will taking this cat in have on the cats that we are already caring for? What is the long-term plan and outcome for this cat? And what are the alternatives to admitting this cat to our centre? Often we are thinking through all of these issues under time pressure. And then we have the added complication of the expectations of the people who want us to help this cat. Cat-friendly homing can be used to support us to make good decisions at this stage in the cat's journey, to optimise the care and the outcome for every cat. Using a combination of good systems, collecting high quality information, proactive planning and teamwork is as important as having a good understanding of cats. We all work with limited resources, and we will never be able to take in every cat. We need to collaborate with other organisations and be clear about the limits of the support we can offer. For example, we may leave all TNR activities to a more experienced organisation, whilst we focus on finding homes for unwanted pets. What do we know as cats as a species? You can see on your screen, you will have the diagram that shows the lifestyle spectrum of the cat. So at the far end on the left, we have the feral cat. It stays away from people. It doesn't really want anything to do with people. It's free roaming. It often self-sufficient in terms of hunting. And then you have the street cat or community cat in some settings. These are adapted to free roaming. They eat from people who feed them. They often eat in restaurants, hotels. They are surviving quite happily, and they come to near people to differing degrees, but they don't want to live as pets. For these cats, TNR is the best option, just to make sure that they are cared for and neutered and not reproducing. At the other end of the spectrum, on the right-hand side, is the pet cat. It's the cat that most of us who work in homing centres are dealing with. And they are the cats that like living with people, are happy to live alongside us, and don't mind being in a home setting. And then there's the in-betweener cat. And these cats vary in their needs and what they want. They may have been pet cats unsuccessfully, and they may have been living in a home which was quite acceptable to them, but they may not be suited to the more common sort of homes that we have for pets. These cats need different solutions. It may be that they're going to be living on a farm. Maybe they're going to be living in someone's back garden. It may be that they'll be a lodger in somebody's house with no expectations from them, from the people. And I think it's really important when we're looking at cats that we consider this spectrum and decide where on the spectrum each individual cat is. Other things that we need to know about cats that can help us when we're making decisions. One of the first principles is that we respect cats as a species. We strive to understand as much as possible about them and keep up to date with new information. We all know cats like to be in control over what they do and where they go, and they don't like confinement, they don't like being restrained. So being in a homing centre is inevitably going to be stressful for them. They're territorial, so moving house, being with other cats is going to be stressful for them, and they'll need individual accommodation. Familiar smells can make them feel safe. Can we bring them items from their home, for example, to make them settle in better? Cats need positive social experiences with people at a very young age in order to accept human contact. We need to consider this when being asked to take in strays, street cats and ferals, especially if they are kittens outside the socialisation period. Cats can adapt, but they need us to give them coping strategies, such as hiding places, resources, opportunities to play, positive social interaction with people. And do we have the resources available to do that well? Cats will experience fear and frustration as well as pleasure as part of their survival. We need to be able to recognise and help to minimise any negative emotions for those cats. What do we know about the cats in the area where we're working? We need to understand our community and how that affects the cats and what work we are doing with them. Is our cat population growing? Is it stable? Is it getting smaller? Where do most of the cats that we come across sit on the spectrum? Are they mostly pets? Are they mostly street cats? Are there enough people wanting to adopt cats? There's no point taking cats into a homing centre if you don't have homes for them to go to. Are there any particular health issues amongst the cat population? What are other organisations in your area doing? Talk to them, find out what's going on. All of these factors will influence how we approach intake. For example, if you are working in a large city and the majority of the adopters that you have live in apartments, the cats you take in for homing will need to be adapted to indoor living. And then we go on to the individual cat. What do we know about this particular cat? Do we have as much information as possible about it so we can decide on the best outcome and develop a plan? Is this cat going to be happy as a pet cat? We want to know about the animal's health status, its age, its sex, its history, behaviour, relationships with people and other cats and animals, what it likes and dislikes, and we need to know why it has been given up. If the cat has previously been owned, what can we find out about it? We may use a detailed questionnaire, a conversation with the owner. You might say to them, describe a typical day in your cat's life. And we may make observations about the cat if we visit it at home. If the cat is a stray or living on the street, then we would need to consider whether this was a cat that would be suited to living as a pet. Ideally assess the cat in the community and talk to the people who feed it or interact with it. Does it approach them for contact? Does it try to come in the house? When did it arrive? Who else is feeding it? It will also be important to check to see if the cat is not a lost pet by scanning for a microchip or checking on lost and found registers. We need to take a holistic and proactive approach in deciding whether to take a cat in, and we need to consider how this intake decision could affect other cats and the running of our homing centre. So what is happening in our centre? What's our occupancy? Before we take a cat in, we need to consider what levels of occupancy we currently have. Are we at maximum capacity, or are we choosing to run at optimum capacity? If we were running at optimum capacity, this means that we will not use the number of pens we have to decide occupancy levels. Instead, we will consider how many cats can we look after well in our centre, given the staff and other resources we currently have. And of course, this will vary over time with absences of staff, for example, or the complexity of the cats you have in. If you have several ill cats that need a lot of care, this will take up more staff time than a higher number of healthy cats. By maintaining optimum occupancy, you will be able to spend more time on those cats we have in to keep them happy and well, and to be proactive at finding them homes, and so their length of stay is as short as possible. We would also try to keep some emergency spaces free so we can take cats in that urgently need our help. This means that although there may be fewer cats in at any one time, they will have shorter stays and more cats can take their place. Ultimately, we will be helping more cats. What about your waiting list? Do you have a waiting list? What impact will this cat that you might choose to take in have on cats that are already waiting for your help? Which cat has the greatest need and which will benefit most from coming into your centre? What resources do I have? We think about the resources we have, whether it's staff, time, money, veterinary care, foster carers. What is this cat going to need? Do we have those available? Could these resources, in fact, be better used for another cat? What is the impact on the cats we're already caring for? Will taking this cat in reduce the standard of care we can provide for the cats that are already there? Or will it extend their length of stay? Will it be better to focus on homing these cats to make room for this one? Introducing a triage process is a really helpful way of managing your intake. You take into account the urgency of a cat situation, the type of support and help it needs, and the solutions we can offer. What is the long-term outcome for this cat? We need to work proactively and have a plan for every cat that we are considering for intake. If you cannot home this cat as a pet, what benefit would there be in taking it in? Admit wisely. What are the alternatives? Is one of the standard things we have to think about every time we look at a cat. Does this cat need to come in? What are the possible alternatives to intake? So, for example, could this cat stay in its current home and be rehomed directly from there, avoiding the disruption of taking the cat in? Could we offer the owner support to keep their pet? Maybe they need help with vet treatment, neutering, subsidized pet food, or behavior advice. We can only ask those questions and develop those services. Is this a healthy street cat that just needs to be neutered and can be safely returned? Is this cat an in-betweener that needs an alternative lifestyle home? If we get these cats coming in regularly, then we need to try and make sure that we have these homes available and ready to go in advance so that the cats can be placed there without having to come into the centre. It'd be great to take a cat that didn't really need to be in a pet home and certainly wouldn't cope well with confinement and place them directly in their final outcome in a stable or on a farm or wherever we choose to place them. Could another organisation help this cat? You know, there are plenty of cat charities out there, and probably many more than we realise. And maybe they're better at helping this cats in this particular situation than you are. Maybe they have space or capacity when you don't. Should you just add this cat to your waiting list and come back to it? Every organisation will have unique challenges, and you will vary in ability to control the cats you can take in. Some of us have cats abandoned on our doorsteps. We have no choice but to take those cats. Other organisations will have cats brought to you by animal control or cruelty inspectors, or be expected to take in cats as part of a funding arrangement. So you have to understand what your limits are, set those limits, and be very clear about how many cats you can take in, still give good quality care and ensure the best outcome, and make sure that you don't put too much stress on staff and volunteers. I think we're all aware that it's a stressful job anyway, but having too many cats to care for, not being able to do it properly, becoming stressed, and then becoming ill, and then not being able to come into work is actually worse for many of us. It's bad for the person who has to take time off. It also means everybody else has to pick up the pieces. So have a plan, discuss it with your stakeholders, make it clear that your aim is to help more cats by optimising capacity. Talk to other welfare organisations and agree a shared approach. Can you all communicate the same message to the public and manage people's expectations? For example, not agreeing not to take in strays that don't need immediate medical help and can't be homed as pet cats. Make sure all your intake, systems, processes, paperwork, policies, and everything else support the cat-friendly homing principles. And really importantly, communicate clearly and consistently, both with your staff, your volunteers, the public, and the people coming to you to adopt or bring in cats. So, intake, admit wisely, take a very deep breath and give yourselves time to consider the best course of action. You can create standardized responses that allow your staff to feel more confident in handling calls. Advise your callers that they will be triaged so you can plan what would be best for each cat. The triage process should be clear so everyone understands how decisions are made. Have an escalation process. Sometimes a different person with a different approach can help. Your waiting list needs to be fair and reviewed regularly. And finally, you need to be kind to yourselves and others. Recognize that you and they are all doing the best that you can, and take care of each other and take care of yourself.
You may be a shelter that takes cats from animal control or from a law enforcement agency. You have no choice about those that come into your care. You may think, therefore, this doesn't apply to you. Maybe not in the strictest sense, but there are things you can do to ensure the individual cat's needs are met. You could even communicate with those controlling your intake and look at ways you can reduce the numbers requiring this kind of intervention in the first place. Think about your intake process. Do you need to change it or your questionnaire to enable you to have a clear idea of this cat's future outcome? Are you asking the right questions? Are you able to interpret the answers well so you have relevant and useful information? Let's take a moment. Welcome back. iCatCare are launching a new course of bite-sized modules, free of charge, to members of our new unowned cat community to build your understanding of cat-friendly homing and how you might apply various elements to take your existing work from good to even better. This course, Cat-Friendly Homing Foundations, will become available early in 2025, and by joining our unowned cat community, you'll be the first to know and have access. Let's hear from Lindsay Quinlan, another one of the early developers of cat-friendly homing, who will be talking about how you can manage your cats well by understanding the relationship between occupancy, length of stay, and departure rate.
Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay Quinlan and welcome to my talk on shelter metrics, where I'll be exploring with you the topic of managing occupancy and deciding just how many cats is too many to house at any given time. Working in shelters, deciding how many cats to admit is one of the most difficult decisions we make. It's also one of the most important decisions, and in fact can have profound implications for how successful we are. Now, this may surprise you. You may think, well, I know how many pens I have, therefore how many cats I can house. How hard can it be? You may also think that with the crisis we're facing with cat overpopulation and endless cats needing our support, surely the more cats we take in, the better. This was certainly my experience for many years. And at first glance, this seems the logical, rational thing to do. But all is not quite as it seems when it comes to deciding how many cats is too many. Never turning a cat away. I want to unpick this statement a bit with you because it's such a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it sounds enormously positive and cat-friendly, doesn't it? It engenders feelings of heroism and hope. It's inspiring. Who wouldn't love the idea of never turning away a vulnerable animal that needs us? Who wouldn't want to work for that organization or donate to that organization? But on the other hand, what if filling up with cats could negatively impact their welfare, and perhaps negatively impact the well-being of your staff and volunteers? And what if filling up with cats could actually cost you more money to help fewer overall? Here's an example of how that could happen. Let's say today we have two identical organizations, Shelter A and Shelter B. Each organization has one person working at any given time, and this person covers everything that needs to be done in a day. And each organization also has 16 pens. But this is where they differ. Shelter A fills up all their pens at all times, no matter what, so they usually have 16 pens full. Shelter B, on the other hand, manages their occupancy differently, based on factors such as departure rates, population health, length of stay, staff capacity, and as a result, generally, they decide to run at about 75% full. using an average of 12 cat pens. And now remember, these homing organizations have the same facilities, the same types of cats coming into them, and the same homing demand from prospective adopters. But they differ in how many cats they choose to house at any one time. That's it. And the consequence of this is that Shelter A's average length of stay is 33 days, while Shelter B's is only 22 days. So why is Shelter A's length of stay longer? Well, because the staff member has more cats to look after, so less time to spend with each cat, and despite the staff member working incredibly hard, things get missed, like early signs of illness or distress. There just isn't enough time in the day to provide individualized care. So some of the cats become unwell as a result, which only makes matters worse. And a couple of times a year, they have really bad outbreaks of infectious disease. The staff member working in Shelter A is also overwhelmed with the workload. Caring for sick and distressed cats is really difficult. So this negatively impacts on her well-being, and she ends up needing to take some time off of work. That only adds pressure to the organization. Shelter B, on the other hand, has less cats to care for every day, which leaves times to meet each cat's needs and proactively work on finding each cat a new home to match its needs as a matter of urgency. Healthy, comfortable cats are much easier to care for and also much more attractive to adopters. And Shelter B's staff have greater job satisfaction as their workload is manageable. Now let's talk the bottom line, money. Shelter A spends about 30% more in a year than Shelter B, and for several reasons. Higher vet bills due to higher rates of infectious disease that requires treatment, higher food costs and litter costs and disinfecting costs resulting from housing more cats at any time, higher staff costs because of sickness, and so on. And yet in 1 year, Shelter A helps around 170 cats, and Shelter B helps almost 200. So what's happened here? How did Shelter B, an organization that was caring for around 25% less cats at any one time, and financially spending over 30% less than Shelter A, end up helping nearly 20% more cats in a year? Well, believe it or not, talking about milk can help us understand how Shelter B was so successful. That's right, you did hear me correctly. I said milk. Now imagine you run a small local shop that happens to sell milk. What factors would guide you in placing your milk order? You might say wastage, fridge space, shelf life, variety, and especially customer demand and how many you sell. Now, as the shop owner, what happens if you buy too much milk? Well, it spoils, of course, and you need to throw it out. So the point here is that buying more milk and stocking more milk will not help you to sell more milk. And the same is true for cats. Now, cats are, of course, far more sophisticated than milk, but like milk, how many cats we help is determined by how many depart our care, and not how many are brought in or how many we house at any one time. And in fact, given how challenging it is for a cat to be in a shelter environment, cats, like milk, are compromised the longer we keep them. So what does happen when occupancy is too high? Well, length of stay increases. And we know that the longer a cat is with us, the greater the chance of disease and distress. This has been measured. So as length of stay increases, so does the likelihood of distressed cats, sick cats. Staff workload will increase because sick and stressed cats need more of our time. This in turn makes us feel stressed and we might suffer from burnout. Cats also become more undesirable to adopters when they're sick and stressed. And our costs rise because caring for sick cats is expensive. And when occupancy is too high, we'll have more cats in our care at any given time, but we'll likely end up helping fewer of them overall. So how do we figure out that sweet spot number of how many cats to have in our care at any given time to ensure we're able to help as many as possible? Well, shelter metrics, of course. We find a simple 2-step metrics-based approach to managing occupancy to be very useful. Step 1 is to determine the number of cats you can care for well at any given time based on your available resources, such as staffing levels and expertise and space. Caring for them well includes meeting their individual welfare needs in real time, housing them safely, closely monitoring their physical health and mental well-being, recording regular objective observations, providing appropriate enrichment, altering the cat's environment to meet their specific needs, and action planning as a team to source the most suitable outcomes for each cat as quickly as possible. And step 2 is then to refine your occupancy to minimize length of stay as much as possible. And now the key ingredient that enables us to refine our occupancy to minimize length of stay as much as possible is data. Data really is the unsung hero of our work and the foundation for shelter metrics. It helps us to assess our performance and can help us to allocate our limited resources wisely to have the greatest impact, and it can help us make informed decisions to reach our goals. And the minimum data we suggest you collect each week is the number of cats in your care, total arrivals, total departures, and the arrival and departure date for each cat. And then when we have that data collected and stored, it can help us determine how many cats we should, not could, house in our care at any given time, using 3 particularly useful metrics, which are occupancy, length of stay, and departure rate. And occupancy is the number of cats you're caring for at any one time. It's typically referred to in terms of maximum and optimum. And optimum occupancy is the number of cats you can care for well with your existing resources, including keeping them in your care for the shortest amount of time possible. Length of stay is the total number of days that a cat remains in your care, and departure rate is the average number of cats leaving each day. This includes all the ways a cat might leave your care, such as homing, returning to owner, euthanasia, or transfer to another organization as some examples. And on our membership hub, we have resources to help you calculate your average length of stay and departure rate, so do check those out, please, if you're interested in learning more. And when you track your occupancy, length of stay, and departure rate, it helps you maintain a steady flow of cats going out to their new homes, which then enables you to bring in more cats needing help. Occupancy, length of stay, and departure rate are also related, and when one changes, it influences the other two. So what is the relationship between them? Well, if the rate at which animals arrive is less than the rate at which they depart, then occupancy will decrease. If occupancy increases, but your departure rate doesn't change, then length of stay will increase. So if you have 10 cats in your care and 1 leaves each day, so your departure rate is 1 for 1 cat, each cat will be with you for 10 days. If you have 10 cats and 2 leave each day, your length of stay will decrease and each cat will be with you for 5 days. But what happens if you take in more animals into your shelter and increase your occupancy to 20 cats, but your departure rate stays the same at 2 cats per day? So if typically 2 cats depart each day and you normally have 10 cats in your care, what happens if you're suddenly housing 20? Well, length of stay increases. In fact, it would double from 5 to 10 days. So another way to look at it is if the rate that cats depart your care dictates the rate that cats can be brought in. If cats aren't leaving, you'll quickly become full. And maintaining a steady flow of cats going to their new homes is what enables us to help more cats and bring in more. So you've already figured out how many you can care for well in step 1. And now you want to refine that number so the cats are with you for the shortest amount of time possible. And you can do that using a simple mathematical equation, which is occupancy equals length of stay times departure rate. So for example, if you know your average length of stay is 25 days and your daily departure rate is 4, to determine your optimum occupancy, multiply 25 by 4, which equals 100. So your target optimum occupancy is 100 cats. Imagine homing then slows, so your departure rate reduces to 3 daily. If you don't lower your occupancy, length of stay will increase, which is something we want to avoid. So you do a new calculation, which is multiplying 25, your average length of stay, by 3, your departure rate, which is 75. So 75 cats is your updated target occupancy based on your current data. And alternatively, if homing picks up and your departure rate increases to 5 daily, you'll want to increase your occupancy to 125 cats to meet the increased adopter demand. So as always, we want to monitor, assess, and respond based on the specific situation and data that we have at any given time. So this all sounds great on paper, but does it actually work? Well, I have seen firsthand that it does. I managed a shelter, a homing center, and these were our facilities. We had money to build new facilities, and we had to decide how many pens we wanted to build. And my instinct, was to build more because we had hundreds of cats on our waiting list waiting to come in. But we actually decided to build fewer pens and reduce our capacity, and instead make our facilities better so each cat had more space. So we went from this standard pens that were quite small to much larger ones. And capacity was actually reduced by about 40%. And this gave staff more time to focus on individualized care, stress management, and sourcing homes. And the consequence of that was that length of stay decreased by an astonishing around 50%. And despite caring for far fewer cats at any one time, homing actually increased by about 30%. So while at one point I was very doubtful in this approach to managing occupancy, I can say that in my experience, it does work extremely well. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that maintaining optimum occupancy, it's not easy. Intake is complex and challenging, especially when the number of cats needing our help often far exceeds our available resources. And this is even more difficult if you work, for example, say a municipal shelter, and you may not have much choice over what you take in or control over that. But some things that have worked for me in the past that might help you too are running waiting lists and prioritizing those waiting lists based on need, but also aiming to have a really diverse population of cats in your care at any one time, as this tends to maintain a steady flow of cats through your organization. So if you have several harder to home cats, try balancing them out with cats that might be highly desirable to the public. I found it helpful to always have a bit of free space at all times so you can take in unexpected emergencies without going over your optimum occupancy. It was useful to create relationships with other local organizations. So if we were full, we could divert intake to them or even transfer some of the cats in our care to another organization if we needed more space urgently. And sometimes making the difficult decision to not take a cat in at that point in time can actually have profound benefits. And this doesn't mean that you're necessarily saying no. Instead, it might mean that you're saying just not right now. And in doing this and deferring a cat's admission, it may mean you'll help far more overall. I think it's also really useful to focus on overall impact. It can feel uncomfortable having empty pens, especially when you have a lot of cats waiting to come in, but helping more cats overall easily justifies this decision. So just to recap quickly, using the two-step shelter metrics approach to establishing and helping you work at your optimum occupancy has many benefits, such as being able to care for each cat well, providing individualized care, ensuring each cat will be confined for the shortest amount of time possible. Cats will not be held back due to experiencing chronic distress or an infectious disease outbreak. Cats will be more comfortable, so they'll sell themselves better to potential adopters. Your team will have time to do their jobs well, and their well-being will improve. And as a result, more cats will end up being homed, meaning you'll ultimately help more of them overall. Thanks very much for listening.
How is that for you? It sounds almost counterintuitive, doesn't it? Fewer cats in your care at any one time means you can help more cats in the long run. How do you think you would feel if you had an empty space? Would you feel guilty? Take a moment. Can you think about how you might incorporate this into your way of working? Remember also Kim's presentation about alternatives to intake at times when you can't take any more cats in because you need to home one first. What steps can you take to make this process work for you? Welcome back. Lots to think about. We have many resources available after this event for members of the unowned cat community. You just need to sign up and it's free. Now let's hear from Laura Watson, who's going to talk about how we can keep cats well, both physically and mentally, whilst in our care.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining me today. So today we're going to be talking about keeping cats well. And keeping cats well is one of International Cat Care's cat-friendly principles. And to keep cats well, we need to give equal consideration to the cat's physical health and their mental well-being. And we'll discuss both of these in detail today throughout this lecture. So to meet both the cat's physical health and their mental health, for their physical health, we need to make sure that we're assessing the cat with monitoring their health. We're using prevention and appropriate veterinary intervention. And for their mental health, this means that we're going to recognise distress and we're going to act quickly. Now, it's also really important for all species, including cats, that physical and mental health, that we understand that they're both intrinsically linked and they can influence and promote one another, both positively and negatively. So in other words, a distressed cat is more likely to get sick and a sick cat is more likely to feel distressed. So we need to make sure that we're considering their physical health. So we're treating pain and discomfort and we're providing preventative health care. And we're meeting their emotional needs. So that's their species specific and their individual needs and promoting positive experiences for them. So it's also really important that we can teach homing centre staff to perform visual assessments of the cat's physical health. Now this can include signs of pain, and this brilliant infographic is really great to have up in your homing centres. And it's things like spotting signs of poor mood, increased irritability, potentially a reduced appetite, behavioural withdrawal, increased hiding. There may be lameness or some regional sensitivity. There may be a reduction in their movement and their activity. There could be decreased grooming in general or increased grooming in a specific area. There can be changes in their posture and behaviour, e.g. there's more tension in body, they're crouching, the lowering of their head, squinting or closing of their eyes, flattening of their ears and compression of the muzzle area. There can be changes in behavioural patterns, so avoiding doing things that are anticipated to cause pain and discomfort. There could be decreased tolerance for physical contact, e.g. active or passive, avoidance of handling, increase in aggressive protective behaviours when approached or touched. There may be more vocalisation from frequent plaintive or urgent sounding meowing, groaning, hissing and growling, and they may have a decreased interest in positive stimuli, play and social interaction. But it's also really important that we teach people to spot good and poor signs of nutrition with the use of a body condition score, because we can see if the cat is too thin or if they're overweight. And this infographic on the screen here is great for teaching home and centre staff how to spot this. And also we need to be looking out for the signs of illness. So their coat condition, is it dry? Are there any visual signs of parasites that need preventative treatment? Are they sick? So are they actively vomiting, or could there be signs that they're nauseous, such as drooling or dribbling? Is their faeces loose? Are they showing signs of diarrhea? There could be the fact they're sore under their tails, a sign that they have had diarrhea. There may be discharge, so they're from the eyes, their nose or the mouth. Then there could be any obvious injuries or abnormalities. And we also need to be looking at their breathing. So it may be normal, but it may be rapid, too fast, may be noisy, or it may be laboured. So it's really important that we teach home and centre staff how to confidently perform all of these, because it then helps us identify cats that need that veterinary medical checkup sooner, rather than other cats that may be able to wait for a more routine preventative healthcare check. So it's also really important to teach home and centre staff to note distress, and that it will look different for each cat, because they're all individuals with their own preferences and we need to respect this. So where one cat may enjoy social contact, another cat may not, and therefore a blanket approach to care should be avoided and individual care provided. Because we need to think back to the lifestyle spectrum of cats, and that not all cats will have had those positive experiences in their the beginning of their life, in their kitten socialisation period, such as the in-betweener cats. So they may show signs of protective emotions, so hissing, spitting, growling, biting or scratching. They may hide, so them trying to increase the distance from the stressor, and that could be the handler as you open up their pen. It could be more subtle, so such as just toileting outside of their litter tray. They're not using their litter facilities. They could be pretending to sleep. We can see this cat on the screen here, although at initial glance it may look like he's sleeping, but when we look closer we can see the eyes are really squinting shut and just trying to look asleep, so they're left alone. They could be freezing, or there could be inhibition of normal behaviours. So often we see this where the cat isn't using any of their resources in the daytime in the homing centre, but when you go home and it's nice and quiet, the lights are turned off, there's not any people around, when we come back in the morning, the cat has eaten, they've drunk, they've groomed themselves, they've used their scratching, they've eaten all their food, they've had a drink. And that's because they feel safer, because it's calmer and it's quieter. But they may just be lethargic or still or withdrawn. But we don't just want an absence of the negative behaviours, we do want to see a presence of positive behaviours for the species. So to keep cats well, we need to make sure that we monitor them, we keep good records so that all team members can be able to access them, we communicate with our team well, and we put action planning in place so we can monitor, record keep, team communication and action planning. So we also need to make sure that we're providing care that's built on solid foundations. So we know cats need to feel comfortable, safe, and have a sense of predictability and control. And only when these needs are met will cats feel okay. And in the context of well-socialised pet cats in our shelters, will they want to play and be friendly. So this infographic is the foundation stones, because they represent the foundation in which their well-being relies. So many people will want to play and interact with a cat, but if we haven't set them up with the foundation stones in place, we can't expect them to positively interact with us if they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel safe, and they don't know when things are going to happen in that environment. So it's just a really good infographic to familiarise yourself with and to ensure that every cat has these foundation stones in place. So assessment of the cat's physical health, this can include coat condition, body condition, as we discussed, diarrhea or soreness under the tail, discharge from the eyes, nose or mouth, injuries and breathing. Can also include their body language as well. Are they relaxed? Are they aroused? Are they distressed? But it can also include things like their housing and management to prevent the spread of disease, so infection control, hygiene, biosecurity, the pen size. We're not going to go into detail in this lecture today because I know that these are being covered in other lectures as well. Have they got good nutrition? So we know cats are obligate carnivores, so they have to have meat in their diet. So are they being provided with a diet that has a meat content in it? But they also like a mix in their diet, so a mix of dry and wet. Are we feeding them creatively, such as with puzzle feeders that we can make from a cardboard box or a shoe box, yogurt pots, to make sure that we're engaging that natural predatory behaviour in their hunting and searching and locating their food, even in their homing centre pens, because this not only encourages physical activity, it also encourages mental well-being as well. We can do that as simple as just scatter feeding if they've got dry food. Wet food can be provided on licky mats. We need to give consideration to their bowl type. So generally cats prefer glass and ceramic bowls because it doesn't taint the taste of the contents. It can't become scratched. It isn't reflective and noisy such as metal bowls. But we do need to bear in mind that every cat is an individual with their own individual preference that they would have learned in their kitten socialisation period. So some cats may be absolutely perfectly fine with a plastic bowl, but it's just assessing that individual cat's need. Also considering their preventative health care, neutering, their vaccinations, their parasite treatment, are all of these up to date? And keeping a record of their health and continuing to monitor it. So ensuring team members use the same terminology when describing cats, and collaborating with a vet and having a good working relationship with one that has a good concept of shelter veterinary medicine as well. And keeping cats mentally well, we need to consider their environmental needs, monitor their mental well-being, and provide cat-friendly interactions, which we'll go through each one of those next. So to meet a cat's environmental needs, there are a few things that we need to consider. So we need to provide them with key resources. So that includes food, water, toileting facilities, scratching facilities, or the option to scent mark. So that can be scratching, but it can also be aloe rubbing. So when we see them rub their faces on surfaces, because they're depositing their scent when they do that. And safe places, so places that they can hide and withdraw. They can perch, because when cats are up high, they feel safer, and that they can sleep comfortably. But we also need to make sure that we separate these resources to meet their needs to perform these behaviours in different locations, because naturally the ancestors of cats wouldn't toilet, eat and drink in the same location, because food or litter or when they toilet could taint the water source or the food source, and it could actually become dangerous for them. So they would actually naturally perform these behaviours in different locations. And even in small homing centre pens, separation of resources can be achieved, which you can see in the infographic here. This is a small pen, but even in this environment, we've been able to separate their food, their water, their litter, and their hiding, their perch, and their safe place as well. And we can also provide them with familiar resources. So bedding, food, litter substrates can help provide them with reassurance. So when a cat is being brought into the homing centre, if we can collect as much information about their previous environment as we can, is brilliant. But if we can't, even if we start to learn about them in the homing centre, we keep a note of that so that we learn what their litter substrate preferences are, what their food preferences are, so that we can continue to provide them with what is comfortable for them. And this resource on the page, the Feline Environmental Needs Guidelines, is a really good resource to familiarise yourself with to be able to meet a cat's environmental needs. So the traffic light assessment is a really good tool for monitoring feline mental well-being, and the tool uses red, amber and green to indicate how well an individual cat is coping with confinement in a homing centre, so how distressing they're finding the experience. And a cat's TLA colour will influence what you do and when, meaning that you give priority to the cats needing your help the most. And it's a call to action to ensure each cat is given the best possible care and no cat is overlooked. So red cats need your help right now, and they're completely failing to cope and need urgent intervention. Amber cats are not doing well and are not comfortable with confinement and need some help, whereas green cats are doing okay and they're generally comfortable in the homing centre. So it just gives you a good guide of the cats that are going to need your help immediately. Now, we also need to make sure that we provide cat-friendly interactions. And when we plan to interact with cats, we can use the CAT acronym to help guide cat-friendly interactions. So did we give the cat a choice about whether or not it wanted to interact with us? Were we paying attention and looking out for any subtle signs the cat is uncomfortable? And where are we touching the cat? And does the cat want us to keep touching them? So I'm just going to play this lovely video here that you can see in a homing centre of this cat here. So the volunteer is offering their hand to the cat and giving the cat the choice to make contact with that hand. And this lovely cat is obviously enjoying interactions. It's choosing to interact with the person's hand, but they're taking it away. So they're giving the cat the choice to interact further with their hand. They're not forcing that interaction. They're giving the cat the choice and control over this interaction, and they are positively engaging with the homing centre staff, and they're wanting that interaction to continue. But that may not be the case with every cat, and we need to make sure that we respect each cat's individual preferences for social interactions, because some cats will not have been exposed to as much social contact in their kitten socialisation period. So for other cats, this could be distressing. So we need to make sure we're spotting those signs. So this is the Touch Zones infographic, and it's a really good infographic to help teach people how to interact with unfamiliar cats, because it guides our interactions based on how cats would interact with one another. So when we see feral or street cats, free roaming cats interacting with one another, they often interact around the facial area, so the green area, because these are areas where they are rich in scent glands and they can deposit pheromones, and they frequently rub these on objects and they find them less threatening. So these are a good area to start your interactions with an unfamiliar cat. The amber areas are less frequently used by the cat to rub against objects, and they're more likely to feel less threatening. So it's best not to start interactions in these areas with an unfamiliar cat, because we aren't going to have the previous, not always going to have the previous information to know whether the cat enjoys interactions in these areas. And the red areas are areas that are easily harmed in a fight with other cats when they're interacting with each other, and they can feel like a direct threat if unfamiliar people touch them. So again, it's best not to start interactions in the red areas with unfamiliar cats. Now, as we learn more about the cats in our care, we may be able to learn more about their individual preferences. And I'm sure we've all known them cats that really do enjoy a belly rub. But there are cats that are going to become very easily offended and distressed if we go straight into a belly rub if they don't enjoy that particular area being touched. So it's a really good guide to guide interactions with unfamiliar cats. And finally, the goal of cat-friendly homing is to maintain an optimum occupancy that enables you and your homing centre staff to have the resources to care for each cat well. And that means, again, we're looking at their physical health, so making sure that we have the time to physically assess them, observe them, monitor them, provide them with the preventative health care that they need, whether that be neutering, vaccinations, whether that be medical care as well if they are physically unwell, and be able to provide them with all the resources that they need in their pen, to provide them with the time. So if they are cats that enjoy social interactions, we're having time to provide that, to play with them, to feed them, meet their nutritional needs. But we also need to make sure that we're reducing their load of stress and getting them out of confinement as soon as possible, so that we have the time to use the traffic light assessment to be able to make sure that we're spotting signs of distress and we're putting actions in place to help these cats, because a happy cat is a homeable cat. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I really hope you enjoyed this lecture and the lectures to come.
I wonder how many of you consider on a day-to-day basis the mental well-being of the cats in your care. Think about one of our cat-friendly principles that Claire spoke about yesterday in the very first presentation: keep cats well. Give equal consideration to the cat's physical health and mental well-being. Let's have that moment of reflection. What will you change as a result of listening to Laura? Do you focus on the cat's mental well-being as well as their physical health? While you're thinking about this, let's have our final 10-minute break. See you shortly. Welcome back. Sadly, if cats become distressed, overcrowded, or are confined for prolonged periods, these can all be triggers for infectious disease outbreaks. Now let's hear from Natalie Dalgray, who will talk about how to house and manage cats to minimise the risks of infectious disease.
Hi, I'm Natalie Dalgray, Head of ISFM, the Veterinary Division of International Cat Care. And I'm going to be talking today about housing and management of infectious diseases. So first of all, when we're thinking about housing, there's sort of a few big groups that we need to consider. So essentially, we're talking about really individual housing versus communal housing. And both of them have some sort of pros and cons, but in terms of our disease risk and how we're trying to mitigate our disease risk, really when we talk about how we're housing cats, especially housing cats with other cats, we're really talking about the direct transmission of disease. So disease being spread from cat to cat. So when we talk about individual housing, we're generally talking about single cats, so cats housed in single units. But sometimes we are also talking about maybe small related groups. So a queen and her kittens would be one of them, or maybe one or two or three cats from the same household that have been relinquished into care. But we really are talking about cats that have been in very close contact with each other previous to coming into the shelter. And this really reduces our disease risk because we're either talking about a cat on its own, so they're not having any direct contact with other cats, or the cats that they are having direct contact with are cats that they have already had long-term exposure to. So if there is any infectious disease risk, these are diseases that they have already been exposed to through living and having close contact with these other cats prior to coming into the shelter situation. When we're talking about also the stress piece with these cats, there probably is lower stress because the cat is either by itself, so it's not having to come into contact with other unfamiliar cats, or the cats that it is coming into contact with are cats that are already familiar to it. So we're not having any increased stress, at least in terms of novel cat stress and inter-cat tension. The downside of individual housing is it is often more expensive. So we're often putting cats together into housing facilities that we've had to invest a significant amount of money in. And really good individual housing can be quite expensive to set up in the first place. Communal housing, again, we can do this in a couple of different ways. It really could be any cat that's coming into the shelter is being moved into a large communal housing space. Or we could be having communal housing where we've got large groups from the same source. So maybe when we're talking about a hoarding situation, we may have a large group of cats that have all had some degree of contact with each other already because they've all been part of that same situation that we've rescued them from. Or we may be talking about cats from a colony or a single site where again, they may already know each other in some degree, but also in terms of that infectious disease risk, they may at least have already been exposed to some of the same strains of infectious disease, especially viruses that may have been circulating through that sort of large multi-cat house situation or hoarding situation, or within the colony of cats that they've come from. So there is an increased disease risk because you're getting a larger group of cats coming together, and even if they are all reasonably familiar with the types of infectious diseases that are being spread, their frequency that they're going to be shed by that group may be higher, and we're also getting that direct contact between cats. That risk is obviously even greater if we're bringing cats in from multiple different sources and housing them together communally, because then they're also going to be at risk of encountering novel strains or novel diseases that they may not have encountered before. Inherently within communal housing, there probably is going to be a greater risk of stress due to inter-cat conflict, either cats as individuals or stress from having to share resources within that space. Potentially communal housing is a bit cheaper. The infrastructure required to set it up may not be as great, but I would also argue that maybe the veterinary bills are going to be higher, and so maybe that's some false economy to a certain extent. So that is something we do need to consider as well. Next up, when we're thinking about our sort of infectious disease risk, we need to be thinking about our cleaning and our biosecurity protocols. So we talked about direct contact, cat-to-cat contact, but when we're thinking about our cleaning and biosecurity protocols, we really also need to be thinking about indirect contact as well. And so the first one of those is surfaces, the pens themselves, the equipment that we may be using between cats. We need to be making sure that we're cleaning that appropriately so we're not indirectly spreading infection through those sort of things. And we also need to be thinking about ourselves as well as staff members moving through and handling different cats in the shelter situation. We are also at risk of spreading infectious disease on our hands, on our clothing. And so sometimes we have to dress up in quite extreme sort of personal protective equipment to just ensure that we're not running that risk of spreading diseases between cats as we move through the shelter situation. Cleaning and biosecurity is a bit complicated though, because often the cleaning products that we need to use aren't always the most cat friendly in terms of their odour, but also when we're cleaning up after cats, often what we're doing is removing some of their pheromones, some of their chemical communications, and especially when we're thinking about the feline facial pheromones, often the cats will have marked or rubbed in and around the enclosure that they're in to start to make it feel more familiar to themselves and start to make them feel more comfortable in the environment. And then we come along and clean all of that away. And so essentially from the point of view of their chemical communication and sense of smell, we're creating a novel environment for them on a regular basis, which we just have to think about the stress implications of that. And we need to be thinking about, are there some things that we can do to reduce that? And especially in cats that may be at lower risk of infectious disease, things like double bedding so that we're leaving behind some of those familiar smells and odours can be really helpful. Spot cleaning, where we're obviously just cleaning away the obvious contaminants, again, are really helpful for some of those low risk of infectious disease cats that we see. We do have to remember cleaning is not just stressful for us, it is also potentially stressful for the cats, and we need to often find a way of compromising with how we're managing that to ensure that we're achieving our biosecurity aims, but also not unduly stressing some of the cats if we can avoid it. We also need to be thinking about how cats are moving through the shelter as well, and often we have this sort of flow of sort of new cats coming in, that sort of arrival piece, then they move into a holding type situation, and then hopefully we move them quickly into that homing situation and get them out of the shelter. So when we think about our new arrivals, we're going to want to examine them all and we're going to want to do a risk assessment. And we really need to understand who those high-risk cats are. And so those high risks are those newly arrived cats that we just really don't know anything about. They have unknown health and vaccination status. And often as we move through into that holding period, we are doing everything we can to get those preventative healthcare pieces on board and reduce the risk down for those cats. We also have cats that as they come in are obviously showing clinical signs of infectious disease or signs that they're recovering recently from an infectious disease. And with those cats, we just don't know how much they're shedding into the environment, especially with viral diseases. We don't know how much risk they are playing to other cats in the environment in terms of environmental contamination. So we have to treat them as high risk. Our pregnant and lactating females have just gone through a huge amount of physiological stress, and so we need to be thinking about them. There's also some implications with them about how we can give them preventative healthcare. We need to be making sure we're using products that are suitable and licensed for pregnant and lactating queens. And they often come with our little kittens and our juvenile cats as well. And these are the ones that, again, because their immune systems are still very much developing, are going to be at higher risk of infectious disease. And so we've sort of got all of these things that we're thinking about in terms of moving them from higher risk to lower risk. And then ultimately our cats that are ready for homing are usually our lower risk cats. Generally in shelters, we don't have staff members that we can kind of separate everything out into sort of risk factor groups. If we are large enough and have enough staff and volunteers to do that, that's great. But often we're needing to think about how our staff are moving through these sort of areas as well. And we need to be thinking about that sort of risk factor. So often our high risk but not infectious ones are the ones that we want to be doing first. And these are really our kittens and our juveniles and our queens, because these are the ones that we don't want to expose to anything, especially if we've not been able to vaccinate them yet. Our sort of homed cats, our cats ready for homing, are usually our lower risk because they've had all their preventative health care. So maybe we're doing them next. And then we really need to be thinking about those high risk infectious disease cases and be doing them last. We want to be doing them and then not handling any other cats until we've had a chance to really clean ourselves down. And again, if we're using a high level of PPE, we want to be making sure that we're not passing anything on to some of the other cats that we're working with, that we can potentially expose them to infectious disease. In terms of our preventative healthcare piece, we're thinking about vaccinations, we're thinking about parasites, both internal and external. We're often wanting to get them neutered before we're moving them food to homing. And during this time period, we really want to be making sure that we're feeding them well, because often they've had a lot of physiological stresses due to parasitism, due to being entire and sexually intact, and having maybe multiple litters of kittens. And all of these things we want to be working to ensure that we're reducing those sort of physiological stresses on the body, giving them a good diet and getting them as healthy as possible. So that in turn is going to be building up their own internal immunity and hopefully reducing their risk of infectious disease, as well as obviously giving them the vaccines that they need to get a good, robust immune response if they are going to be exposed to anything. When we think about stress and infectious diseases, we have to recognise that a lot of the cats coming into our care have these pre-existing physiological stresses. They're often having given birth or gone through multiple pregnancies. The infectious disease, the parasitisms that I've already been mentioning about, all of those are often in place in a significant proportion of cats coming into our care. But we also have to think about the emotional stresses of the shelter itself. It's a strange place. It has strange sights, sounds and smells. It has strange people. It's got strange other cats, new cats, and it very much has a new routine going on as well. And we do recognise that in terms of cats moving through the shelter, that research shows that pretty much all cats, when they first come into a shelter situation, they find it stressful. But if we've got a really good set up environment for them, we should see a really good reduction in that stress over that sort of first 4 days and a continued reduction over the 2-week period. And that's why it's so important that we get the environment right, that we create a really nice, predictable routine with the cats. And so our sort of top tips for managing cats in that situation to try and reduce the stress, we need to make sure the housing is right, and the most important thing within that is giving them a place to hide, as well as all of the resources that they need. We need to make sure we're doing our cleaning appropriate, especially due to that risk of infectious disease. We need to be doing a good risk assessment and then cleaning appropriately. So those ones that are at a lower risk, where they're not currently showing clinical signs of infectious disease, they're the ones that maybe we can move into double bedding, spot cleaning, etc. with them. It's important that we create a predictable routine of regular, quiet, calm interactions over the day, so the cat knows when to expect things, when it knows when feeding occurs, when it knows when cleaning occurs, when it knows when it's playtime or positive social interaction if the cat desires it. But it's also important that we let them sleep. Sleep is really important. And so again, we need to have a nice predictable nighttime routine and ensure that we're creating a nice quiet shelter overnight to allow them adequate rest and recovery. I also just finally wanted to touch on record keeping as well and auditing. It's really important that we're just keeping a handle on what's going on in the shelter. We need to be thinking about when we have lost cats, what those causes of death are, the types of disease that we're seeing and where we're diagnosing it, who we're diagnosing it in. And all of these things also feed into an understanding about length of stay and length of time to be fit to home as well. And especially infectious disease and infectious disease outbreaks, these all have an impact on length of stay, length of time ready to be homed. It's really important that we start to understand who, what, where, and when some of these things are occurring that may be having an impact on our shelter metrics, because ultimately we can't really improve what we do without understanding where the problem is. And so when things have gone wrong, it's really important to look back to understand what has happened and why. And sometimes there's not a huge amount different that we can do to reduce that risk of it occurring again, but sometimes there are some small changes that we can put in place. And this was an example on a spreadsheet of when I had to manage a sort of infectious disease outbreak in our kitten unit. And one of the first things I did was start to map out who was at risk and why, who was already fully vaccinated, who wasn't, who was potentially interrelated, where the cases occurred, because then again, physically, cats in more closer proximity, the mothers and other kittens in closer proximity may have been higher at risk. So we needed to maybe quarantine them and keep a closer eye on them to ensure that infectious disease didn't occur with them. So it's really useful sometimes to map some of these events out and then to really have a bit of a reflective think about what went wrong, especially once we're through that more sort of stressful emergency situation. Look back, see what we could do differently the next time. So sort of final thoughts, we need to be thinking about good biosecurity to reduce the exposure to disease. We need to be making sure that we're putting preventative healthcare in place to do everything we can to give these cats a healthier immune system while they're in the shelter situation. And again, we also need to be thinking about that piece around how stress relates to the immune system as well. If we can reduce stress, again, we're going to be making these cats more robust. So if they do encounter infectious disease in our shelter, they're in a better situation to be able to manage it and fight it off themselves. If we get all of that right, we should be reducing the length of stay the cats have in our shelter. We should be saving more lives. Potentially, we're going to be saving ourselves some more money on vet bills, and everyone overall should be less stressed. Thank you all very much for your time.
Natalie has highlighted the link between stress and disease and some tips for how you can reduce the risk of disease outbreaks and manage them if they occur. Let's have our minute and ask, when was the last time you had a disease outbreak? What small step could you take to improve hygiene or your protocols to reduce the likelihood of infectious disease outbreaks occurring or spreading? Welcome back. Let's hear from Lindsay Quinlan again, who will be taking us through the final stage of the cat-friendly homing journey, the outcome.
Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay Quinlan, and I'm going to be talking with you about the outcome phase of the cat's journey in our care, and of course, how we can make that cat-friendly. So cat-friendly homing is all about providing individualized care. So we know that the cats have very different needs based on their lifestyle. But when it comes to cat-friendly homing, it's important to remember that we're focusing on the pet cat and the in-betweener cat, as it's only these two lifestyles that should be entering shelters or homing centers in the first place. The journey and outcomes for feral and street cats looks very different, as confinement to a homing center or foster home would be far too distressing for them. And we learned a lot about the journey of feral and street cats in previous talks. This talk focuses on the outcome for the pet cat and the in-betweener cat, as you can see here in this infographic. And I think a good place to start is to consider what are our outcome options for pet and in-betweener cats that come into our care. And they're, if lost, reunite them with their owner, or source a traditional pet home for cats that live well with people, source a suitable, what we call alternative lifestyle home for in-betweeners. There's the return to field option in some parts of the world, which I'll cover briefly. And there's also the option of making an end-of-life decision following an ethical decision-making process, which of course would involve a quality of life assessment if that decision is being considered for compromised welfare. This talk is not going to cover end-of-life decision-making, but we do have some resources available to you on in our membership hub that can support you in navigating end-of-life decisions. So I do encourage you to check that out if you think it would be useful for you. So you remember the journey of an unowned cat in our care can be broken down into 3 distinct phases: intake, care, and outcome. And our focus always needs to be on the outcome. That is our driving goal, to deliver outcomes that meet each cat's needs. And really, no cat should be brought into care without a plan for its outcome. So from the first moment we learn about a cat, even before we admit them into our care, we're thinking about what outcome might be right for the individual and what's our plan of action to deliver that for the cat. And if we're realistically unable to meet a cat's needs, then I think we need to question if admitting them is the right thing to do, because no cat should be worse off as a result of our interventions. And sometimes after intake, once the animal's with us, there can almost be a sense of relief that the cat's now safe because we know we will care for it well. But we really need to remember that intake is really just the start of the process, and confinement in our care is only a part of the cat's journey to a new home and not a permanent or prolonged situation. Why the emphasis on outcome? Well, because most cats will struggle, like this cat here, and find the experience distressing to some degree, because confinement is intrinsically stressful for cats. There's also greater risk of the spread of disease when large numbers of cats are kept in close proximity, and the longer a cat is confined, the more likely it is to get sick. And of course, only by homing more cats are we able to help more by bringing them in. So for cats that are suitable to live as pets, the goal is to find them a home with people, to admit them into our care for the shortest amount of time possible before sending them to their new homes that meets their needs. So how can we optimize the homing process of pet cats? Well, there's quite a few things we can do, like engaging with our local community and tapping into local interest. We don't want to wait for people to come to us, and we want to be proactive in creating and engaging with our community. Say, for example, hosting a coffee morning where we could share our experience on a particular topic. For example, why do cats play? Or what is a cat and why does it matter? We can be showcasing the cats in our care, looking for homes. For example, hold a regular adoption event, use social media to share the cats in your care. Or you could even create a paper copy of a newsletter and ask local cafes to have some on the tables for people to look at. Talk about why people should home from you. Don't be shy. Talk about how good you are and the benefits of homing from you. For example, that all the cats in your care come vet checked and vaccinated and neutered, and with, for example, ongoing advice and support for anyone who needs it. We also want to remove the barriers and match flexibly. Sometimes we inadvertently put up obstacles for people who want to adopt cats. And we do it for the best possible reasons. We're custodians for the cats in our care, and we're responsible for their well-being. So it's easy to be overly cautious or perhaps even overly critical. But it's important to remember we only need good enough, where a cat's needs will be met and it can have a good life. We can also challenge some of the rules that may exist. For example, that cats or kittens can't live with children, or that some cats need really experienced owners. In my experience, sensible first-time owners who are keen to take all our advice are often a great match for a cat that may be harder to home. We want to be delivering a quality, customer-friendly service that meets members of the public's expectations. So things like responding to inquiries quickly, ensuring we're available to see people when it's convenient, and making the adoption, interview, and homing process friendly and accessible. I think sometimes we don't realize that it can be quite intimidating for someone who's never gone through it before. And now moving on to finding homes for in-betweeners. So remember, an in-betweener is a cat that is not usually identified until they come into a homing center with the view to finding them new homes. And in-betweeners are cats that have previously lived unsuccessfully as pets because they are uncomfortable being in close proximity of people. But having lived previously as pets, where all their needs were met by people, they require the same level of support in a future home. And the reason why they lived unsuccessfully as pets, it isn't because the specific home wasn't right for them. It's actually because no conventional pet home would meet their needs. And there are two types of environments where in-betweeners thrive, depending on their temperament traits and needs. And one would be a free-roaming lifestyle where they have food and shelter and a person to care for them from a distance. This might be a hotel or a stables, a small holding, a farm, even a spacious private garden where the cat could have its own shelter. The second is that some in-betweeners could do well living in a home with people, but not as a traditional pet, and instead more like a lodger, where they can have unrestricted free access to the outdoors and absolutely zero pressure to interact. Or in other words, an owner who is happy to give the cat everything it needs without expecting anything in return. And things to think about to home in-betweeners successfully. Advertising via your normal channels, sharing the word via your network, perhaps put up a flyer in a farm shop, visit a country fair, or place an advert in country magazines. Consider anything you might be able to do to make it easier and more attractive to someone homing an in-betweener. Are you able to deliver, for example, or provide a supply of food or waive your usual homing fee? It's really important for people who are homing in-betweeners to have realistic expectations, meaning in most cases to expect nothing at all in return for meeting all of the cat's needs. And now sometimes we find when an in-betweener has complete choice and control over human interaction and feels safe, they may choose to interact with people. And I think sometimes our instinct can be, oh no, we got this wrong. This is actually, a social pet that should be in a pet home. But it's much more likely this cat is showing its sociability because it feels safe. And the reason it feels safe is precisely because it's living in the ideal environment that meets its needs. And when it comes to the in-betweener, why does it matter? Well, here's a good case study of a cat named Venus that really exemplifies why it does matter to identify in-betweeners and find them suitable homes. And the sign's a bit tricky to see, let alone read, so I shall read it for you. And it says, Venus, female, 2 years old. I'm an ex-breeder, have had no socializing, I'm afraid of everything. I've had 3 homes. I spent the last 3 months on top of a kitchen cupboard. And when the woman tried to get me down, I hurt her and came back. It may take years to make friends with me, and I may not be able to go outside for a very long time. I'm a very difficult cat. And Venus, of course, she wasn't difficult. She was terrified of people. And despite this, organization's well-meaning attempts to home Venus as a pet, it was never going to work because Venus, she just wasn't suitable to live as a pet with people. And she's a cat that likely would have done really well in an alternative lifestyle. And now I'd like to introduce you to a cat named Zabka. And this time, Zabka is a success story. She was a cat that was purchased at a pet store, actually at Harrods here in London in the UK, and lived as a pet in a home for several years where she did all she could to avoid people. She actually got on well with the cats in the house, but not the people. And her owners had her for several years, and during that time, they worked with a behaviorist to support her. And it helped a bit, but because Zabka wasn't well socialized to people, no intervention really would have been sufficient to meet her needs in that home. So the owners decided to give her to the homing center where I was working at the time. And as you can see in the center picture here, she was extremely distressed in the shelter. So we urgently sourced her an alternative lifestyle home. And you can see her in her new home in the photo on the right. She went to live in the countryside with a family who had an old caravan on their property that became Zabka's shelter. And she had free access to the outdoors. They fed her daily. She quickly sorted out a rodent problem they had. And for the rest of her life, she stayed as far away from people as she could. But most importantly, she had a really great life that met her needs. And the last option that I'm going to talk you through briefly is return to field, which you may wish to consider if this is legal in your area. Return to field programs operate similarly to traditional TNR programs, with the exception that the cats have been admitted to a shelter at some point in the process, perhaps even accidentally. Return to field programs stem from the recognition that neuter return is appropriate for most healthy unowned cats that are thriving in the community, regardless of whether they have entered a shelter. And return to field has formed a really important part of the Million Cat Challenge in the United States to reduce levels of euthanasia in shelters. And there's more information about return to field on our membership hub. Cat-friendly homing is all about meeting the needs of the individual. So how do we ensure that we are doing that well? Well, first, by using all the information we have about the cat that we've been collecting since the very beginning to make informed decisions. So things like the intake information and the pre-admission history, vet history if you have it, vet records for the cat's stay with us, care observations about the cat's physical health and mental well-being. We want to be matching the right home, matching the cat to the right home, which would require a comprehensive adoption process, including a homing interview and careful but not overly restrictive cat owner matching. We want to be providing support and accessible, practical, up-to-date guidance for new owners. And lastly, we want to be following up. It's worth devoting some resources to find out how cats are getting on and tracking our outcomes. It's a great opportunity to learn what's working well and perhaps where we can improve, so we're able to provide even better outcomes to the cats in our care in the future. Thanks very much for listening.
So there ends the cat-friendly homing journey, where you've met the needs of the individual cats in your care. All stages, intake, care, and outcome are connected. And any cat that is brought in has a clear pathway from the outset to a better life. Take your final minute to reflect in iCatConnect. Do you feel you're just too busy to be that proactive about finding homes? Could you make some subtle changes to the way you work to maybe remove some of the barriers to adoption, or to actively promote the cats that need homes? Welcome back. We have some practical resources available for members, so don't forget to sign up for free membership to the Unknown Cat community. That's the end of the cat-friendly homing journey. And it's also very near the end of iCatConnect for this year. But we do have our live Q&A, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Please join myself, Lindsay Quinlan, Natalie Dalgray, Lindsay Narroway, Agnes Dufau, and Manuela Rowlings. Harry Eckman will be chairing this session, so don't forget, if you haven't already registered your questions in the chat, start now, and we will answer as many questions as possible.